When we were talking last time, we were the fall of '88. Did you start some new in sometime in '88, and it would be the summer or fall of '88? Was there some new hearings that were instituted in regards to the divorce case?
Yes.
And what kind of hearings were those?
After the mandatory settlement conferences were over, then I got these papers to show up for a hearing about vocational testing.
Okay. And what did you go to a particular courtroom for that?
Yes, family court, Judge Castro.
Okay. And that's the family court that you told us about, the small
On
family
6th
court.
Avenue, yes.
Okay. And what was the purpose of that hearing?
Mr. Barry and Dan wanted me to agree to submit myself to a battery of vocational testing.
Okay. And did you agree to that?
I showed up at the hearing and I said that I really didn't have any argument with vocational testing per se, but it just appeared to me that this was this month's garden variety delay tactic. If they had wanted vocational testing in this divorce.
Sustained.
How did you feel about vocational testing? How did you feel about vocational testing?
I didn't mind doing vocational testing. It was the time frame that was a problem.
And why was the time frame a problem?
Because if anyone wanted vocational testing in this divorce was filed in 1985. That was the time for them to ask for me to submit myself to vocational testing. At this point, it was just a delay tactic.
Now, were you representing yourself at that time?
Yes.
Okay. And did they want you to go to any particular vocational tester?
Yes, they of course wanted me to go to their expert in the field.
And at the hearing, did you agree to go to vocational testing?
I didn't have any choice. Yes, I agreed to it under the conditions that if they wanted it, they'd have to, meaning Dan would have to pay for it.
Okay. And did you also ask for a different vocational tester?
Yes, there's a very famous woman in La Jolla that does stuff like that, Marjorie Shavitz, and I asked the judge if I could go to her, and he said yes.
Okay. And when you went to the vocational testing, after you went to that expert, did anything happen to the vocational testing?
Yes, when I got there, I told her what had happened with Ruth Roth earlier, is that I was ordered to go to Ruth Roth and Dan was supposed to pay. And then when I went to Ruth Roth a few times, Dan wouldn't pay and Miss Roth sued me. So I warned this woman that the same thing might happen again, so that she better call up Gerald Barry and get it straight in writing that they are really going to pay for this, because they were court ordered to do that. And she called Gerald Barry.
Okay, now did Mr. Barry also want this woman to release confidential information?
Yes, he would only agree to pay if she would tell him how it was going and stuff.
Okay, and at that point in time, was she willing to release confidential information?
No, she was not.
And
she said she was uncomfortable with that arrangement.
And were they then willing to go ahead with the vocational training?
No.
And was there, at that point in time, was there any issue of vocational training in the case? Or did that stop that procedure?
Right, it never progressed.
Yeah. Now, was the case eventually sent to, was the case at some point in time finally given a trial date?
Yes.
Okay.
Wasn't given a trial date. I went there and demanded one.
And did you eventually get a trial date?
Yes.
Okay. Now, when did the trial take place?
End of December 1988, the week between Christmas and New Year's.
Okay. Now, in November of 1988, did you go over to Mr. Broderick's home again?
Yes. After the vocational testing fell apart, I didn't have the trial date yet. And I didn't know where we were going from here. I mean, I needed a settlement. And so I got all dressed up and I went over to Dan's house on purpose to demand that he talk to me and that we do something about getting a settlement.
And And was that to talk to Betty Broderick?
Yes,
And did you talk to him on that day?
yes.
Now, at the time that you went over there, did you do anything? Was there anything that you did to force him to talk to you?
Yes, I was always scared confronting him. And so, because he'd tell me that he'd arrest me if I went near his house. So, as a protection for myself, I called Diane Black ahead of time and I told her what I was going to do. So I was going to go over to Dan's house and confront him. And if he arrested me, I had my cellular phone in my hand. And between the time that he called the police and the time they actually arrested me, I'd have time to call her and tell her that I'd been arrested.
Okay. And
That she would get me out or call lawyers or do something.
did you tell Dan that you were going to call Diane Black that time?
Yes.
And what?
And I threatened that Diane then would turn around and call the press and everybody else if he had the nerve to arrest me again.
And what did he do at that time?
He talked to me. As I approached the house, he was out front gardening, so I didn't have to get in the house. And he was very surprised to see me. And I said, I just want to talk. I just want to know, how can we settle this? Let's just please settle this. Let's get something done and be done with it. And he said, okay, but I don't have my figures with me here. He was literally gardening. And he said, I can't do it here. I don't have my figures, he said. But he would get back to me the next day. So I said, fine, thank you very much. And I left.
Did he get back with you after that? Okay. Now, showing you, do you need a break at this time?
No, come on, keep going.
Okay. At the, if I can show you what's been marked as ZZ, this is what I showed you the other. Is this do you recognize this letter that was written around Christmas time, 1987?
Yes.
Okay, and is that a letter that you sent out to a number of people,
Yes.
family and friends?
Yes.
Okay. In, now, did you end up, did the trial proceed forward at that time?
Yes, I went to Judge Murphy and I demanded a trial date. And he called Mr. Barry and he came over and Mr. Barry said he could do it in what otherwise would have been holiday time.
Okay.
So we did go to court.
And did you end up representing yourself at that trial?
Yes.
Okay. Now, you, during the trial, did you talk to the court about various things that you had saved, including the marriage encounter book and some cards and some floral cards?
Yes.
Papal blessing?
Yes. Those were things I used in the trial as evidence or something.
Okay. Did you, and were those things that during the period of time of this divorce trial that you would refer to?
Yes.
Okay, and what was the purpose of looking at those things or reading them?
Because it seemed to me a tangible proof that what I was talking about and what Dan had promised us and everything was a tangible proof of that.
The, and in I might have one more.
Certainly.
I believe I left something in the car, but I'll just go back to that.
All right.
Yes, maybe this be good time for sidebar.
All right. On the record?
No, I don't think it's cool.
All right.
Do you remember approximately how long the trial lasted?
From the day after Christmas till whenever it was over. I don't remember if it went beyond New Year's.
Now, during the trial, there was some break during the trial where Mr. Berry had some appointments to be gone, and there were some breaks in the days in the trial. I remember taking a break for at least a couple days where you weren't in trial.
I don't remember.
In what building was the trial in?
In the family court building on 6th.
Okay. And is there a public entrance to that building?
Yes,
Okay. And when you went to the court, how would you enter the courtroom?
through the public entrance and through the courtroom doors that go to the hall.
Okay. And while the court was not in session, would the courtroom be open, locked?
Locked, I presume. I don't know.
Okay. Well, you couldn't go into the courtroom until the proceedings started, could you?
Right.
Okay. How did Mr. Broderick enter the courtroom?
Through the security judge's entrance and through the judge's office and with the judge and his lawyer. He came in that way.
Okay. And when you came into to the courtroom, who would be would you see people talking, chatting?
Yes,
And
Mr.
who-
Barry and Dan and the judge. It looked like they were having coffee and having a nice little talk before court started.
Okay, you didn't know what they were talking about.
No,
And was Mr. Ashworth in that courthouse at that time?
yes,
And was he ever involved in the conversations?
yes, he was.
During the trial, was there testimony about community property and things that were to be split or divided up?
Yes,
And did that include out-of-state property in Colorado?
yes.
And who was it that valued that property?
I allowed Dan to value everything because I had no knowledge. I wouldn't have been able to evaluate anything.
Okay. And was the property in Colorado, was that all valued at a minus amount?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And who kept the property in Colorado?
Dan,
Okay. And did you have to pay him to keep that property?
yes,
Objection, Your Honor, the judgment speaks for itself.
Sustained.
Were you charged during the time that the case was going through the system? Were you charged every month for the upkeep of that property?
Your
yes,
Honor, objection, your proper Epstein credits and speaks for itself.
Sustained.
During the time that the at the trial, the law practice was valued at the time of when Mr. Broderick left you.
yes,
Did you have to pay for his loans, however, that he was paying after the time he left you?
Objection, Your Honor, this is an area that
Sustained.
After the trial, were you awarded any of the personal property from that trial?
yes.
Okay. And what were you awarded?
Your Honor, excuse me, again, I think the judgment
Sustained.
speaks for itself.
May I be heard on that, Your Honor?
Certainly. Why not?
During the trial, did you put witness, you represented yourself, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And did you put witnesses on for the purposes of trying to have custody of your children?
Yes, I did.
And without going into specific property, did you receive some property that you wanted as attached to the children?
Yes.
Did you get the children out of that
No, I
trial? Now, was there any effect from the trial that you felt after the trial and after the decree that, is there any feeling that you had about Mr. Broderick or what had happened to you in this case in regards to that judgment?
yes, a lot.
And what was that?
Well, I felt I had done a fairly good job in the trial and in the courtroom, and the evidence about the children and the evidence about the money seemed to indicate to me that I would get a substantial amount of money as community property. I should get a substantial amount of money as support, and I should have gotten custody of the children and child support. And so I was very optimistic between the trial and the approximately 30 days we had to wait for the verdict. I thought it was going to come out okay. I didn't know about a lot of things. I didn't know about that the custody of the children and the Epstein credits were the discretion of the judge. I didn't know it could go that, and I didn't know about Epstein credits really that much.
Did that have an effect? Did you believe that there was a purpose of Mr. Broderick delaying the trial?
Yes, it was then that I realized, because of these things called Epstein credits, that every time he didn't show up at depositions and every time he didn't show up at mandatories and every time he put off everything, he was charging me and charging me and charging me and charging me against what in the beginning of this divorce was over $1 million worth of community property that was mine. Because of all of these delays and all of these charges, it dwindled to practically non-existent.
Did you learn at that time of specific amounts of money that had gone to Larry Broderick before the divorce?
Yes.
Before he left you?
I didn't know until during the trial. A girlfriend discovered, because she could read numbers and bank things a lot better than I could. She was just flipping through these piles and piles of legal papers that are all over my house. And she found by luck that he emptied 2 bank accounts 2 days before he walked out in February of '85. And so during the trial, I went in and I said to him on the stand, I said, you know, you close these bank accounts, where did the money go? And during the trial, he said he forgot that he had sent, his brother needed $1 million or something. He had sent all that money to his brother Larry and he forgot.
Okay.
And if I hadn't have discovered it, I never would have been informed of what happened to those accounts.
Did, after the judgment in January, was there a change in the visitation regarding the 2 boys?
There was a court-ordered visitation now. So it was in writing that I should have those boys every other weekend from after school till 5 p.m. on Sunday only. And then in writing, it said about which Easter and which Christmas and which Thanksgiving. And so for the first time, it was in writing when I should have the boys.
Yeah.
And I didn't think Dan could fool around with that.
Did you, did you try, at least with the visitation, to get the boys longer on the weekend?
Yes, when the verdict came out, I tried to explain to the judge how couldn't I please have the boys from after school on Friday to put them back to school on Monday, because Sunday dinner has been a big tradition in our family. You've heard the kids mention it in here. I'm an Italian Catholic, and Sunday is like the core of the entire week, where I always made a big roast or a turkey or something, and Sunday dinner was very important to the children and to myself. And if they had to be picked up at 5 o'clock, we'd have to be home by 3 so they could get their things together and get their homework done and be ready at 5. And it really messed up our Sundays, and I was denied. I could not have them until Monday morning.
Now, was there a, was the file, the court file still lost at the time of the trial?
Yes.
And was there a file that was made up for the court for the divorce proceeding?
Yes, Mr. Barry supplied the court with portions of the file.
Okay. Were you ever requested to supply the court anything for the trial?
No, nobody asked me.
When you went to court to hear the verdict on January, the trial ended the very first week in January, is that correct?
Yes.
And when you went to the court on January 30th to hear the verdict, did you know what the verdict was going to be?
No, I felt very positive about it, though. I was absolutely thrilled to have it over with.
Sustained.
Did you have a belief as to whether you were going to have custody of the boys?
Sustained.
That weekend, did you have any problems? Was Lee living with you at that time?
Yes, she was.
And did you have any problems with her?
Yes, I did.
And what was that?
We had been invited to Beverly Hills for the weekend, right? I had to go for the verdict on a Monday in the morning. I believe the 30th was a Monday. And that previous weekend, we went up to Beverly Hills to a birthday party, my sister's 40th birthday party. And I had to rent a car because the Suburban was crashed during the trial by Kim. I rented a van, and I brought the kids. I picked Kim up at the LA airport because I flew her in from Arizona. And Lee was living with me, and I got the boys, and we went up to Beverly Hills to have this family thing. My parents flew in from the East, and my brothers were there, and we had this big party. And Lee really was sick. She had a fever, and she was very sick, and I'd spent a lot of money dressing her up and stuff, but she couldn't attend the party because she was really sick. She was very pale, and she was very sick. So while we went to the actual party, she stayed in bed at the Beverly Hills Hotel and had room service and couldn't get up for the weekend.
Did you end up, when you got back that week on Sunday, that weekend, did you end up having a fight with her?
Yes, I put Kim back on a plane back to school, and I put the boys back at Dan's house, and Lee was at my house, and I was exhausted from the weekend, and I had to exchange the rental car, and I had to go to court in the morning. And about 9:30 at night, or late to me, I go to bed early, but 9:30 at night, some boy comes to the door, and she's going to go out with this kid on a Sunday night after we just got back from this busy weekend. And I said to her, I said, Lee, please don't go out, because, I have to go to court in the morning, and I'm really tired, and if you go out, I worry about you. And of course, I've still got this kind of drug problem in my mind, and I'm really being careful of who she's with and what she's doing and stuff. And we'd gone to therapy at a guy who was telling me about tough love. I'd have to be very specific in what I wanted of her, very specific about times and about what the rules were, specific. So I said to her, I don't want you to go, please cooperate with me just this once. Let's just go to bed, and you can go out tomorrow and do whatever you want. And she wouldn't do it. And I said, okay, you walk out that door, you're not coming back. And I locked the door and I went to bed, and she didn't come back. And that was the night before the verdict.
Yeah.
We were always having fights like that.
When you, after the verdict, how did you feel?
I felt absolutely robbed, both of the children and of all the property. And I also asked the judge that the verdict have no loopholes in it, so that Dan couldn't jump through those loopholes like he always did in the past, that it be airtight and be specific about payments on certain dates of certain amounts so that there weren't loopholes in it. And there ended up being a lot of loopholes in it. I asked that Dan's monthly money to me be automatically transferred through banks, so I wouldn't have to be subject to his checks coming late and his fines and everything. And I was denied that request. So I was still subject to Dan's personal checks being sent, and I didn't want to live like that. And because of the community property split being so minuscule to me, I was totally dependent on that monthly check, which again, I didn't want to be dependent on. I asked that if I got support, that it be for a determined amount of time, not at Dan's whim or dependent on other things, just so that I could make plans in my life about investments and about where I'd live and stuff, and I didn't get that. The monthly money that I got was...
This is kind of a narrative.
Sustained.
Did, on January 22nd, before the verdict, did you start a job anywhere?
Yes, there was an ad in the newspaper in the La Jolla Light for a preschool teacher, which is what I am and what I like to do. And I knew the verdict was coming. The trial was over. I knew I had...
Sustained.
So did you?
I applied for the job and got the job, yes.
And did you arrange to take at least a day off for the time to go to court?
Yes, I told the lady that I knew I needed January 30th off to go to court, but besides that, I shouldn't have any more problems about going to court.
Was there a reason that you got a job after the trial and before the verdict?
Because I wanted to start a life, and the job fit who I was and what my my degree was in, it also fit the hours I wanted for the boys. I worked from 7 to 2, which left me free in the afternoons and on weekends. You know, other jobs that I looked into didn't leave you free for the kids. And so this was perfect, that I'd be free after school to go to all the boys' sports and stuff, and I'd be free on weekends. It was a perfect schedule for me.
Yeah, now during this time, you mentioned that you flew Kim in from Arizona. Where was she going to school at that time?
Yes, University of Arizona.
And that's in Tucson?
Yes.
Okay. During this time, did she have an old boyfriend that was causing problems with you?
By this point, she had had several, 2 or 3 years of problems with Tom, yes.
Did sometime in the late winter and the spring of '89, did you receive any calls from Tom?
Yes, he was angry at Kim.
Were there times where he was angry at you for meddling in Kim's affairs?
Yes, he was just ranting and raving and screaming and cursing and calling her horrible names and threatening to kill her. And he had physically attacked her earlier at 2 different locations. And I was very scared of him. She told me he had a gun. She told me he was a drug dealer. And I was afraid of him. I thought he was kind of off the deep end.
Were you getting any calls at your home?
Yes.
Okay. Now, sometime in the beginning of March, did anything happen to your home as far as anyone trying to break in?
Yes.
Was there a time where there was somewhat male people who tried to break into your house?
There were several problems over the years with my house, yes.
Okay, and what do you remember the date that did someone try to break into your home at some point in time?
Yes, several times.
At some point in time, did a stair break in your house?
Yes.
Okay, and do you remember when that was?
I don't remember exactly when it was, but someone was coming up the back stairs to break into the house, and Kim had had a huge party the night before, and with 100 of people banging on the stairs, one of them broke, and the burglar fell down the stairs because it was dark.
Did you, now after January of 1989, did you make any decisions about the home that you were living in on Cali de Cielo? About whether you were going to stay there or sell it?
Exactly what time are we at?
Sometime after 88, after December of 88, January of 89, did you make a decision about selling the home or moving out of the home?
I made it wasn't a hard and fast decision at that time. I was thinking about it, being that I didn't get the children, seemed pointless to stay in that house that was gobbling up all the money, and I couldn't have a life if I stayed in that house. And I didn't have the money to pay bills and stuff. So there was no point in me staying in that house if I didn't have the children. But at the same time, I hired an attorney to help me get the children. So I didn't make any hard and fast decisions about the house.
Did you do anything about fixing the house up in January?
Yes, the house, as we've discussed before, was a mess. And so if I was going to sell it, I had to repair it to get a decent dollar for it. So I had the kitchen remodeled only to the point that they took the fronts off the existing warped cabinets and put fronts on them. And I had the entire house painted outside. And I had further landscaping done so that it really looked good. If I was going to sell it, I had to do those things.
Did you have Did you have things on the inside painted and fixed up?
Yes.
Okay. You've seen some photographs of your house, what your house looked like in November of 19. You've seen the photographs here before of your house in November that were taken in November of 1989?
Yes.
Was that photos taken after the house was fixed up?
That was the best the house ever looked because I wasn't living there and I had fixed it up as a model home. It had fresh flowers everywhere and everything was painted and everything was spick and span, and I'd moved out all the junk that people live with, and I wasn't showering or sleeping in the house at all. I just had it all set as a model home so that every time a real estate person wanted to show it, it was ready. And there were no remnants of showers or people eating there or anything like that.
Was there, before March of '89, had you had any discussions about having a gun for any purpose?
In the back of my mind, I was thinking about having a gun for several years because a friend of mine who lived in the same neighborhood and was a woman that lived alone in a house like mine had a gun for her own protection. And so ever since she had a gun, I thought maybe I might get one. But I had never, there was no particular day I went and bought a gun.
Now, in sometime prior to that, did you ever go shooting at a shooting range?
Yes,
Okay. And Mr. Frant testified as to a particular incident. Was that about the time you went there?
yes.
Do you remember why you went to the shooting range?
I remember that they called me at the house and they were soliciting people for this sporting club. It had racquetball and exercise Nautilus machines and shooting and stuff. And this was an introductory offer. They were trying to get this off the ground. And I had my MasterCard and I did shoot guns way back in grammar school, and it was a fun experience. I was looking to meet new people and get out of the rut that I was in, and I thought I might do it. I think it was only $30 or something. And so I went primarily to meet people, but I went to the class.
And then when you went to the class, when you shot the guns, did you wear anything?
When you go in the little room where you actually shoot the guns, it's mandatory there that you have ears and I think plastic eye things that they supply.
Now, in March of '89, were you still working at the preschool?
Yes,
Now, on some morning, do you recall getting some calls at the preschool?
it was actually, yes.
And can you describe those calls?
It was just an average day at the preschool. I went to work at 7 o'clock like I was supposed to, and it was a regular day. There was nothing happening. And I got a few phone calls through the main office. Is Betty Broderick there? Is Betty Broderick there? And the woman had put it on hold and come get me. And by the time I'd pick up a phone, the person would have hung up. And it happened 4 times. And being that nobody really knew I worked there, and the children wouldn't have done that. If they needed me, they would have spoken. And I thought something's really weird here. Somebody's trying to determine that I'm here. But it made me real upset and nervous, and I left work early and went home.
Okay. And when you went home, did you find out whether someone had been in your house?
Yes.
What did you find out?
Maria, when I got home, Maria told me that when she got to work, someone was in the house. And it was someone with long blonde hair, and she got in a white and with a black roof car, and I knew the description was Linda Kolkina.
Did you show her a picture of Linda Kolkina to
Yes,
see if in fact that was who was in your house?
yes. And she said she was in my bedroom and that she took things when she
Yeah.
left.
At that point, did you have an answering machine on your phone?
Yes,
And was there any message on the answering machine?
yes. There was a 4-hour notice put on the answering machine at 9:30 that morning, which meant there was going to be a proceeding at 1:30, exactly 4 hours later.
Now, other than, so the first notice you got of that was when it was on your phone at home?
Yes.
No one called you at work about it?
Well, I figured they were calling me at work to establish that I couldn't pick up the 4-hour notice at home.
Okay. But nobody called you at work and
Spoke to me.
spoke to you
No.
and said, we're going to court?
Only
on a
the
4-hour
hang-up
notice.
calls.
Okay. Now, did you go to court?
Yes, I got home. I shouldn't have gotten home till after 2, but I got home around 1:20, which didn't leave me much time to get there for 1:30, but I just flew right out the door and jumped in the car, and I was down there at 1:30.
And when you got there at that time, where did you go?
I went to the family court, and there's a clerk's window with a sign-up sheet for ex-parties. And that's what it was called. A 4-hour notice is an ex-party hearing. And so I asked her to look, and I looked on the sign-up sheet to see where Mr. Barry was, and he was not on the sign-up sheet. So she couldn't tell me what courtroom he was in.
Did you, at some point in time, did you go to Judge Howitt's courtroom?
Yes, I went to Judge Howitt's courtroom to ask the reporter about something, and it was locked, and I couldn't get in.
Okay. And did you see Mr. Berry at the courthouse
Yes, I needed to speak to the reporter because I had ordered a written,
Sustained.
Okay, you've already gone through that you needed to speak to the reporter. Did you see Mr. Berry?
yes, as I was waiting for them to open the courtroom doors, he came out of them.
Okay, so he was leaving Judge Howard's courtroom.
Yes,
Did you confront him as he left the courtroom?
yes.
Okay, and what did you do at that point in time?
He told me what had happened in the courtroom, and we went back in.
And had the hearing already been had by the time you were there?
Yes, it was over and he was leaving.
And when you went back into the courtroom, did anything change when you got there? In other words, did Mr. Berry's whatever order happened before you got there, was that just the order that the court gave when you went in there?
Well, we kind of discussed it again, but it ended up everything that he got stood anyway. I didn't have any effect on it.
And what was that hearing about?
That hearing was about changing the visitation for the wedding, suspending the $16,000 a month.
And
There
was
are
that
a
about
bunch
a
of
wedding
other
list?
things.
Was it about a wedding list?
Yes, they wanted the wedding list back that I had taken from the steps, I don't know, a week or so. I don't know how much earlier than this.
Okay. Did you take a wedding list from their house?
Yes, when I was dropping the boys off on a Sunday evening, I picked up an unmarked envelope that was on the front steps of the house. It wasn't addressed to anyone, didn't have a return address. It was a white envelope.
And did you look in the envelope?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And was it a wedding list?
It was a copy of a wedding list.
And did you take it?
Yes.
And what was that for?
I thought it was interesting from my point of view that that he invited the child psychiatrist that said stuff against me that cost me my children, even though he never met me. And he invited his accountant, the one who added 2 + 2 comes out -8. And he was inviting his attorneys that helped him get this incredible settlement against me. And several judges were on the list. And it looked like a thank you very much for helping me screw my wife party.
Did you was there an appeal pending at that time?
I don't think at that time.
Okay, but there was an appeal notice filed.
Yes, but not yet.
Now, did you do anything after you left the courthouse? Did you
Yes.
stop anywhere?
I was very upset at both Linda being in my house and mostly at the 4-hour notice because I was making attempts to have a normal life and get this all behind me. I felt like if Dan wanted that wedding list, he could have called up or he could have come and just asked me for it, give it back. Big deal. You know, it wasn't a big deal to me. And so I felt like I was being attacked and the 4-hour notice on the machine was really kind of shady, being that they knew I was at work and it was them that called and hung up. And I just felt like it was back to the same old dirty tricks. And suspending the $16,000 a month as a joke to people when I got the verdict, I said, you know, I probably won't get 30 days down the road here before it's all pulled out from under me. And sure enough, that was the first thing they did was totally suspend the monthly check. And I just, and with her being in my house, I just felt I was being attacked and I didn't have any defenses to make them stop or to defend myself.
Did you purchase anything at that time?
Yes, between the courthouse on 6th, you get on 5 and you go north to La Jolla, and this shooting place, the Weiser place, the Nautilus place, it's all the same place, and it's right on the freeway, kind of around India Street. And I'd been there before, so I knew what it was.
Your Honor, I believe that I left my evidence box in the car.
Think you want to recess early? You want to go on to one of your boards?
Maybe I could go on to the board and maybe that would be the easiest way. Your Honor, if the record could, I'd ask the court to take judicial notice that on January 15th of 1988, there was an appellant's reply brief that was filed.
So you notice
That on February 2nd, there was personal service of an order to show cause of contempt.
Take notice of that.
On February 3rd, there was an ex parte order sealing exhibits. There was no appearance mandatory by no appearance made by the defendant.
Take notice of that.
That on February 18th, there was a special settlement conference set.
Take notice of that.
On February 29th, there was a contempt hearing, restraining order, and notice of a hearing.
Notice of that.
On March 10th, there was a special settlement conference set.
Take notice of that.
On March 18th, there was a proposed order of contempt.
Take notice.
On March 21st, there was a new original page 4 filed of the contempt order.
Take notice of that.
On March 23rd, there was notice of hearings that were served on the attorneys.
Take notice of that.
On April 10th, there was personal service of an order to show cause and contempt.
Take notice of that.
On April 13th, there was a notice of hearings.
Take notice of that.
On April 27th, there was a special settlement conference.
Take notice of that.
On May 4th, there was a contempt hearing.
Take notice.
And a restraining order was signed but not filed at that time.
Take notice of that.
There was on May 19th, a decision in the appeal and an order affirmed.
Take notice of that.
On June 3rd, there was a compliance conference that was vacated, no appearance by either party.
Take notice of that.
On June 17th, there was a settlement conference.
Take notice of that.
Governor, I would ask another board be marked HH8, which is July through December of 1988.
So mark.
I would ask the court to take judicial notice of the mandatory settlement conference that was set for the date of July 1st, that was vacated.
Take notice of that.
There was a trial set for July 27th, that was vacated.
Take notice of that.
On August 29th, there was a hearing, which was continued. There was no appearance made by the defendant at that hearing.
Take notice of that.
September 2nd, there was a hearing.
Take notice of that.
On October 9th of 1988, there was personal service of an order to show cause in regards to vocational training exams.
Take notice of that.
On November 14th, there was a hearing in regards to a vocational training exam.
Take notice of that.
On December 27th, there was a trial in the dissolution trial, the property trial.
Take notice of that.
On December 28th, the trial was another trial date in the dissolution.
Take notice of that.
On December 29th was another trial date for the dissolution.
Take notice of that.
On December 30th, there was another trial, that was another trial date for the dissolution trial.
Take notice of that.
There was also the restraining order that was signed on May 4th, 1988, was filed at that time.
Take notice of that.
Yeah, just mark it. I'm sorry, Ron. Thought I was prepared for a moment. I'd ask another board, Your Honor, that's labeled 1989, January 1st through June 30th, be marked as next in order.
HH-9.
I would ask the court to take judicial notice, Your Honor, that on January 3rd was another dissolution trial day.
Take notice of that.
January 4th was another dissolution trial day.
Take notice of that.
January 5th was another dissolution trial day.
Take notice of that.
January 6th was another dissolution trial day.
Take notice of that.
That on January 30th, the decision as to the dissolution trial verdict was rendered.
Notice of that.
The February 3rd, there was an ex parte minute order filed on the sealing of exhibits with no appearance by the defendant.
Take notice of that.
On March 14th, there was an ex parte hearing in regards to wedding list, personal service, and notice of hearing and regards to custody of Lee, and supplemental judgment on order to show cause, restraining order, and restitution orders was had on a 4-hour notice.
Take notice of that.
On March 23rd, there was personal service of an ex parte order from that hearing.
Take notice of that.
On March 27th, there was service of a declaration in regards to custody, stay away, trust funds, and visitation.
Take notice of that.
On March 31st, there was a hearing in regards to custody, support, and visitation. And there was personal service on the order in regards to custody support, and a qualified domestic relations order, and an order in regards to reimbursement of unused expert fees.
Take notice of that.
On April 10th, there was personal service of an order after the hearing.
Take notice of that.
On May 3rd, there was notice of appeal that was filed by the defendant.
Take notice of that.
On May 12th, there was a notice of filing of the appeal filed by the defendant.
Take notice of that.
On May 15th, there was a notice to prepare clerk's transcripts, which were filed by the defendant.
Take notice of that.
On May 23rd, there was notice of a filing filed by defendant.
Take notice of that.
And on June 4th, there was a service of substitution of attorney with Ms. Confaro substituting in for Mr. Barrett.
Take notice of that.
If I could go to the last board at this time, Your Honor, and ask that it be marked as next in order.
HH 10, and that covers July 89 to December 89.
Yes, Your Honor.
So marked.
And I would ask the court to take additional notice on July 5th, there was a notice to prepare the clerk's transcript that was filed by the defendant.
Take notice of that.
On August 25th, there was an ex parte motion and order in regards to custody. There was no appearance by the defendant.
Take notice of that.
On August 29th, there was a hearing and order in regards to custody with no appearance by the defendant.
Take notice of that.
There was on September 1st an order to show cause child support and attorney fees filed by the defendant.
Take notice of that.
And on October 30th, there was a hearing in regards to child custody and attorney fees that was off calendar and no appearance by either party.
Take notice of that.
Thank you. Now, at the time that you, did you purchase a gun at that time?
Yes,
And at the time that you purchased the gun, did you purchase some bullets?
yes,
Okay. How many boxes of bullets did you buy?
3,
And at the time you purchased a gun, did you actually fire a gun?
yes,
Okay. And what was the purpose of firing a gun? Was there a shooting range where you were at?
Yes, where they sell the guns is right across the hall from the firing range. And when people are buying guns, they take the guns that they're interested in and shoot them to see if they're interested in.
Okay, so they had you bought one of the box of bullets. Did you fire that through a
Yes.
gun?
Mhm.
And did you end up purchasing that model of gun?
Yes.
Now, were you able to pick the gun up on that day?
No.
And did you have to show identification for registration?
Yes.
Okay, and was there a waiting period before you were able to pick up the gun?
Yes.
And at some point in time, did you in fact go back to, where was it that you bought the gun?
This place that was called not,
Well, sustained.
Did you go back there and, did you end up going back there and picking up the gun?
yes, it was all paid for and everything on the first time, and then you just to pick it up.
And showing you what is, the bullets that we've seen in court, the 2 boxes of bullets.
Yes.
Did you buy the bullets the day that you bought the gun?
Yes.
These bullets. And you've seen another box of bullets here in the courtroom, is that
Yes.
correct? Did you buy those bullets there on that day also?
Yes.
Okay, when you picked up the gun, did you fire that gun at all?
I fired a gun. I don't know if when I went back and picked up a gun, it was the exact same gun. I don't know if they just let you fire the ones in the case and then you get one off a back shelf. I don't know if it was exactly the same gun.
Okay, did you have to clean your gun at all? In other words, did you,
When I fired it the day that I bought it, when you fire it, it gets real dirty and grungy and messed up. And the man in the store took it all apart and cleaned it. But personally, after I got it home, I never fired the gun and then I never cleaned it.
Do you want to take the recess and get your?
yes, yeah, I need to get the items that I left.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll take our morning recess at this time. We'll be in recess until 10:30. Give you enough time, Mr. Early? 15 minutes?
Yes, Your Honor. I hope they are just right down in the car.
You want to take a little longer recess? What's your
If
pleasure?
we could take 20 minutes, if not, they would just be in my office.
All right, let's be in recess for 20 minutes, ladies and gentlemen, until 25 to 11. Please remember the admonition.
Broderick, showing you what has been marked DDD for identification, Your Honor, and that appears to be a cash register receipt dated 3/14/89 in regards to a purchase of a handgun. So marked. And also, if we could have marked, Your Honor, the next in order, I have marked EEE, which is a bill of sale in regards to a pickup date of 3/29/89.
So marked.
Broderick, do you recognize both of those items?
I kept a file on the gun and all the papers that had to do with it and the rules of it and everything. So these were from my file.
Okay. So this is related to the guns we've seen here in court, is that correct? Okay. Now, after the trial was over, was there some paperwork that had to be done as far as transferring property?
Yes.
And did you receive anything in the mail in regard? Well, there was a matter I previously discussed. May I step out in the hallway with someone about a matter I previously discussed with the court?
Sure.
Well, we'd tell you what was going on if we knew what was going on. Apparently, Jack Early, as you can see for yourselves, has stopped the questioning. Perhaps he's just checking his notes. The camera angle makes it impossible to see what's happening at the defense table. In the foreground is the... Here we go. He apparently went out in the hallway, we're told by our cameraman, to speak to someone. We'll see whether or not that has an effect on his questions.
What is marked as, Your Honor, first of all, FFF is a quick claim deed for property, Lot 9, Sierra de Calea, piece of property.
All right, so marked.
And GGG is another quick claim deed. The first one would be the property at Cali de Cielo. GGG would be property that would be described as a timeshare at Warner's Spring, Your Honor.
All right, so marked.
Have you seen these two documents before?
Yes.
Okay. And did you receive those in the mail?
Yes, as part of the divorce settlement, Dan was ordered to finally take his name off the house I was living in.
These have been taped back together. Did you do anything with these when you received them?
Yes, I tore them up
And why did you tear them up?
because Linda Colkina was not supposed to be doing the paperwork with me.
And had there been any discussions in court before about her having her name on paperwork?
Yes.
Okay, and when you received that property, who was the person who signed it as the notary?
Linda Colkina?
The, sometime in 1983, did you have a discussion with Mr. Broderick in regards to your marriage? I mean, had you had discussions about your marriage at that time?
In 1983, we had a lot, yes.
Okay. And did you do anything yourself in regards to your marriage in 1983?
Yes, that's a papal blessing for our family.
And showing you what has been marked as HHH, Your Honor, which appears to be a papal blessing that's dated in 1983.
So marked.
Have you seen that before?
Yes,
Okay. And was that something that you procured in 1983?
yes, we had received a papal blessing on our marriage the day we got married in '69. And this is now a papal blessing for the entire family, including all the children. And
Okay.
it's November 8th, 1983.
Okay. Now, during a time in 1983, did you have any discussions with Mr. Broderick in regards to any anything that you were looking forward to in regards to your marriage? Any trips that you wanted to take?
Yes,
And how did that come about?
there was this boat that I read about in a magazine that had sails, and it was owned by Marjorie Merriweather Post, and it was a gorgeous sailing vessel, and only a few people could sail on it, and it was very, very expensive. And I thought it would be a fun trip to do, but it was very, very expensive. And Dan said we'd do it on our 20th wedding anniversary,
Now,
which would have been a ways off because we didn't have the money then.
had there been, at that time, were there any friends that were planning, who'd been married longer and planning events like that?
Yes, a few of our friends were married 4 or 5 years longer than we were, and they were having anniversaries on their 20th. It was kind of a big deal. They weren't waiting till the 25th.
Now, in April of I asked you about whether you represented yourself in the divorce. How did you feel about representing yourself?
I was afraid. I was scared. I didn't know how to be a lawyer.
Did you make any request of the judge about your physical condition?
Yes, when the trial started, I was fine. I was just scared and I was crying and upset, and I wanted to force this to a conclusion, which is why I represented myself. And during the trial, I got sick. I got a flu, and I had a fever, and I was really sick.
Did you ask to have some time off till you felt better?
In fact, I had laryngitis. I couldn't speak. Well, it was really obvious to the court that I was really sick, but they couldn't give me a day off. Yes, I asked 2 or 3 days in a row, could we just have a day off here? And no, they couldn't.
And why did they tell you couldn't?
They didn't have to tell me why. It just, I asked for it, said I was sick, I couldn't talk, I had a fever, could I please have a day off? And they said no.
Okay. During the trial, do you remember anything about Mr. Berry having a vacation planned?
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered.
Overruled when asked.
Yes, toward the end of the trial, Mr. Berry was leaving on a firm trip to Hawaii. His whole firm was going to Hawaii. And so the last several days of trial, every time I started a line of questioning, they cut me off and said, you know, we've already gone down that road. Let's not do that again. We've already done this way. And they kept cutting me off because Barry had to leave on this Hawaii trip.
The Did you end up hiring, when you purchased the gun, where did you keep it in the house after you first purchased it?
I bought it to protect myself in the house, so it seemed logical to me that where I would keep it would be in the nightstand next to the bed. So I tried that for a while.
Did you move it after that?
Yeah, I was uncomfortable with that. I told everyone I had the gun right away because I didn't want any accidents with this gun. I told the kids, I told Maria, I told other people I had this real gun, and I showed it to the boys, and I, in fact, took them shooting one time. I was absolutely adamant that this was a real gun, and if they opened a drawer or saw it anywhere, they were not to touch it at all.
Now, when you took the boys shooting, did you take them shooting with that gun?
No.
What did you do?
We had been to some appointment downtown, and on the way home, we stopped at Weiser and we used range guns.
Okay.
I didn't shoot at all. I think the boys just shared one gun.
And when you shot at the range, did they wear any special protection again?
Yes, you have to. Eyes and ears.
Now, did you do anything in regards to hiring an attorney after the final decree?
Yes.
And what was the purpose of that?
Well, I asked the boys if it was okay if we left things the way they were, and that they would just see me when the decree said they were going to see me. And Danny especially said, "Oh no, Mom, oh no, I want to live with you." And so I went out and I hired another attorney to try and fight for the kids.
Now, at some point in time, that there was a wedding that you became aware of a wedding that Dan had. Is that correct?
Everybody became aware of it being planned quite a while before it because it was in the newspaper.
Okay. And you also became aware that Dan went on a trip after the wedding, didn't you?
A honeymoon, yes.
Okay. And your 20th anniversary, when would have that been?
April 12th, 1989.
And what would have been the closest weekend to April 12th, 1989?
I don't know exactly.
Okay. If
April 12th was not on a Saturday in 1989.
and did you become aware of what kind of trip Mr. Broderick went on that year when he went on his honeymoon?
Yes.
And what trip was that?
The children told me that he went on a Caribbean cruise with a boat with sails.
Okay. Now, there was some testimony as to a party that Kim had at your house. Do you remember the party that they talked about where there was a problem with the band?
Yes, Kim had a lot of wild parties at my house, but that was the worst and the last of them.
Okay. And do you remember what happened at that party?
It was a full-blown riot. There were hundreds and hundreds of teenagers there all over the street, the front lawn, the decks. I have a large property, and every inch of the property was covered with people, most of which didn't know us and we didn't know them. There were skinheads with leather jackets and all kinds of people, and screaming and yelling, and people throwing in the pool and jumping on the trampoline. And the worst part of it was I lived on a cul-de-sac, and there were so many cars that they not only parked and blocked everyone's driveway, but they ended up filling the cul-de-sac like a solid parking lot. And the police had to walk in from way out on Calle del Oro. And they said that this was a real hazard, fire-wise and safety-wise, and we had to get those cars out of there right away, or I'd be ticketed or jailed or whatever.
Did you try to stop the band from playing music?
Yes, it was a band that was down in my pool house, and it was a real loud, plugged-in electrical amplified band with microphones and things. And I went down and I said, the police are here. You've got to stop. You've got to stop, because all the neighbors were calling and stuff. And the man on the microphone said, don't listen to her. Let's party.
Okay. Did you eventually do something that stopped the music from playing?
Yes, I pulled the main electrical switch to the entire property, and that's how I shut them down.
Okay. And then the party quickly dispersed after that.
Not that quickly,
But eventually.
but I shut down the main source of the noise.
Now and you mentioned the pool house, and that was something that was in the pictures. When did you build that?
In 88.
And what was the purpose of building the pool house in that property?
The house that I lived in had 3 bedrooms, and then the middle of it was kitchen, dining room, living room. It all kind of flowed together. I didn't feel like my children had a family room like we used to have back east, where the kids would go in the basement, and they'd listen to records and talk, and there'd be no parent there. If my kids, especially Kim and Lee in the teenage years, but even the other kids, had friends over, I could hear them and they could hear me, and I could see them because of everything connecting. So I wanted to have a real family room for the kids, and that's what it was. It was a big room with a fireplace in the middle and a bathroom and a little kitchen, but it was just a huge empty room with a fireplace for teenagers and other kids to have parties and get together and talk and dance, and out of underfoot and out of my way, and vice versa.
Did you expect to get the children back in your custody?
Yes, that cost over $100,000 to build, and I only did it for the kids. I didn't need a room like that. Yes, I always expected to get the children back.
Yeah. There was now at the time that about the time that you hired Walter Mon, did something happen to your support payments in court?
Yes, I hired Walter Mond in February and wrote a check out of my regular checkbook, and then it was in March that the support was suspended.
During the summer, did you have some regular visits scheduled with the boys?
Yes, because of the decree, the divorce decree, I was supposed to have them for the first time for the entire month of July.
Okay. Now, had you ever had, was this the first time where you ever had a court order time where you were going to have the boys for a substantial period?
Yes, and then because of that, I was able to make plans and make reservations and think ahead of time that I have them from this day to this day, so what will we do? And I made plans.
Okay. And what did you do?
We ended up driving. It was the boys' idea. There was an article in a local magazine about skiing, snow skiing on glaciers in the middle of summer. My boys love to snow ski. And so we drove to a glacier so they could snow ski on a glacier in summer. And the glacier was in Whistler Mountain in British Columbia.
During that period of time, were you seeing any doctors in regards to the boys in custody?
Yes, again, this was the first time I knew I had the boys and I could make a point.
Okay, first answer the question yes, and I'll ask what the reasons. Were you making appointments with?
Yes.
Okay, and what was the reason for that?
This was the first time I could make appointments with Dr. Nelson since I had consulted him way back with the boys, because it's the first time I knew I'd have the boys. We also saw Dr. Gary DeVos, who's a child psychologist, and he saw the boys each separately. He saw the boys together as brothers, and then he saw me with each child separately, and then he saw me together with the two boys. So we spent a lot of time there.
And what was the purpose of that?
I hired Walter Mond to get my children back, and you can't just walk into court and say she wants them back. I mean, that's all I had was I wanted them back. So he had to have paper trails and expert witnesses and opinions as to why I should have them back and how well we get along and how we interact and how much they love me and want to be with me. So it all had to be documented.
Okay. Now, did you have that summer that while you had the boys, how would you describe your mood? Did it improve at all?
Absolutely. As long as I have the kids, I'm fine. I mean, my energy level comes right back because I have somebody to do things with. I'm not alone anymore, and I love doing things with my kids. And we just have nonstop fun. We go from one thing to another. And my house is fun. It was near the beach. It had a swimming pool. The kids just love to be at my house, and I love having them there, even though they're noisy and they make a mess.
And were you also seeing other healthcare professionals in regards to, so that you could go into court and ask for custody?
Yes, Dr. DeVos referred me to a codependency therapy group because he thought that I was in a troubled alcoholic marriage and that I needed codependent therapy. And so I went to a women's group.
Now, was there a time that you had scheduled where you wanted to be able to resolve the issue as to the boys in custody?
Yes, it was always important to me. I waged custody fights every summer. So
Okay.
yes.
We'll go through this. I'll ask the question, then you answer yes or no, and then I'll ask you the reason. Okay, that's easier that way. Was there a time that was important for you where you were trying to get custody of the boys?
Yes, every summer. Yes, every summer.
Okay. What was the reason that there was a time that was important?
Because of the change in the school schedule of what bus route they're going to be on and what soccer team they're going to be on and what Boy Scout is dependent on what part of your neighborhood where you live in. And once the children were established in September at a certain address, I thought it was important that they keep a continuity going. And so every May or June, I'd start doing stuff to get the kids that summer. Because it didn't matter to me if they switched houses in the middle of the summer. There was no schedule. So I hired Walter Mond in February to do a custody fight that summer. So for sure I had the boys before school started, right in the beginning of September.
Okay, so you expected that there would at least be those court hearings by that time?
I was sure there would be, yes.
Okay. Now, was there a hearing that was set before school was set to begin?
Yes,
And was that hearing continued?
it was canceled or continued or put off or something.
And how did you feel about that?
I was absolutely devastated. I was horrified. I had done every single thing Walter Mond told us to do, and all the paperwork was done. Everything was in my file. He knew it was important to me to get it done before school started. And Dan was interviewing these doctors, and Dan was being resistant to the whole thing. And when the day came, it couldn't happen. But he told me, not to worry. It was going to be put off till October, and that not to worry, it was going to be put off till October. And I said to him, I don't know if I'll be alive in October. I was so upset.
Okay. And was it continued till October?
Yes,
Okay. Now,
but it didn't happen in October either.
was there a time that you sent Rhett to New York?
Yes,
Okay. And was that with a court order or court approval?
no,
Okay. And was there a reason that you sent Rhett to New York?
yes. In August, when they came back from Hawaii, they were in Hawaii for 10 days or so with Dan. They came back from Hawaii, and then we were going to go back to the every other weekend. But it was still summertime, and the boys really always wanted to be with me in the summer rather than home with a maid. So Danny went to Sun Valley, Idaho to visit his friend Matt Curry, and that left only Rhett home. And now we're in the summer of 1989. The girls have both been invited to leave the house, so they don't live there anymore. And Rhett would have had to stay in Marston Hills all by himself with a maid of some description while Dan was at work, and he didn't want to do that. He wanted to stay with me.
Now, in the fall, were you doing anything? Were you doing anything in regards to finances or trying to cut your expenses or do something with your house?
Yes.
Okay. And What was that?
Moving?
What did you do? If you can just tell me, did you do something to your house? Listed for sale?
Well, the thing was, if I didn't get the kids for the school year, I was going to get out of the big house and out of the big car. But I still thought I was going to get the kids before September happened. And then when September happened, it was put off till October and everything. I did list the house for sale, thinking I'm not going to spend a whole nother school year wasting all this money and all this time, wasting my whole life waiting to get the kids back.
Did you buy a condominium?
Yes,
Okay, and where was that located in?
a 2-bedroom condominium in La Jolla.
And the boys, if you were to get custody at some time, would they have been able to live in the condominium with you?
Yes,
Okay. And I take it at that time, Lee and Kim were out of both homes.
correct.
Now, at some point in time, you became aware that Dan was going to leave the country, did you not? At some point. I'm not asking
Yes,
you
and
right
I got some sort of a letter about Greece.
Okay.
He was going to Greece.
And did school at some point in time start for the boys after the Labor Day weekend?
Yeah, right after.
Was the was there a time when you had Mr. Mon go to court for you to get permission to have your children with you while Dan was in Greece?
Answer yes.
And why was that?
I didn't need Walter Mon to go to court for me. Dan sent me this letter that while he was away, there would be 3 or 4 different babysitters handing off Rhett, only Rhett again while he was gone. Because at this time, Danny's gone to camp with Francis Parker. So it's only Rhett at home. And I don't know the reason, but he wasn't going to have a full-time paid continuous babysitter. One secretary friend was going to hand him off to Robin, was one of them, the old babysitter, and then hand him off to Sylvia Cavins, and they were handing Rhett off, and I thought, well, why have Rhett subject to all these different schedules? Just leave him with me for the week or 10 days or wherever you were gone. But Dan would not agree to it, just person to person, so we were forced to go to court because Rhett wanted me to get him. So Walter Mond went to court that day
Okay.
to get Rhett.
And when he was in court that day, did you find out later that another weekend had been switched?
Yes, Walter Mond called me and told me that, yes, hooray, you got Rhett for the time there in Greece. But in exchange for it, I had to make this deal where Dan would then get the kids on the SC Notre Dame football weekend, which was your weekend. So I switched, and now you're going to get the kids this other weekend. And I just went, oh, no, you should have told me.
Was there a problem with that?
That was the Acapulco weekend that had been planned for a long, long time, and all the money had been paid, and all the arrangements had been made. And I assured Brad 1,000,000 times nothing would go wrong this time, because it had gone wrong a lot in years past. Nothing would gone wrong. I had it in writing that I was free that weekend. And so Walter went and switched the weekends, and then I couldn't take the kids, and it was a mess.
Now, after the school year started, how was your contacts? How would you have contacts with the boys?
After school started that year,
Yeah, that
I
year.
was only allowed to have them every other weekend, so I would call them all the time or see them after school at soccer or basketball games or whatever I could.
Were they calling you?
Yes.
Now, also, there was when you were married originally, was there some wedding china that you had at the time of your wedding?
Yes. I think everybody gets a set of dishes when they get married.
And after the divorce, did you know who had that wedding china?
Dan ended up with it.
Okay. And did you try to get the wedding china back?
Yes, Dan ended up with it because I never owned a china cabinet in my in all my years of marriage. I kept it in a closed up cupboard. Dan had a big glass enclosed fancy dining room china cabinet. And so he put all of my wedding china in there. After he married Linda, they got another set of wedding china of her taste, and mine was taken out of the china cupboard. So I said, well, as long as you don't want mine, I'd like to have it back for sentimental reasons. It had nothing to do with the cash value of the dishes, and I certainly didn't need dishes, but it was my wedding china, and I just thought, if you don't want it, I'd like to have it, please.
And were you able to get the wedding china?
No.
What were you told?
Linda said she'd rather smash it or give it away than give it to me because I didn't ask for it in court.
Now, after school started and Dan Broderick and Linda had returned from Greece, did anything happen which made it difficult to talk to your children?
Yes.
And what was it? By telephone?
Yes.
Okay, and what was that?
All of a sudden, Linda's voice was back on the machine.
Now, since the time that the court had talked to Mr. Broderick in 1987 about Linda's voice being on the machine, had it ever come on the machine again until this time?
No, he was court ordered to keep the girlfriend off the machine, were the exact words, I believe, of the court order.
Was there any reason at that time that you knew that the boys could not have their own line going into the house?
Everyone thought the boys did have their own line going into the house. There were still these two lines going into the house, the adult line and the boys' line. And the boys did have a line going into the house.
How old were the boys at this time? We're in 1989.
Rhett's 10, so Danny's 13.
Okay. And when Lee was in 7th grade, do you know what year that would have been?
Not particularly.
Okay. Assuming that she would have been 1st grade when she was 6. When was she born?
Lee was born in 71.
Now, was there a special event in October?
Yes, October to me started the next several months of holiday things. It had Halloween in it, it had the USC Notre Dame football game, and it had Larry's Oktoberfest, which ran right into our birthdays, which ran into Thanksgiving, which ran into Christmas. So yes, October was the beginning of a holiday season for me.
What made in that October in 1989, was there something special about that year?
It was the last Halloween that Rhett would have been in the lower school. He was in 6th grade at the time. And the lower school is the only school that has the parade with the costumes and everything. So he would have been graduating from lower school.
Okay, and I'll get back to that. But was there something particular that you found out about that SC game in Oktoberfest
Yes.
that had significance?
Yes.
And what was that?
Dan wanted to take the whole family to the SC Notre Dame game. And he and Linda, after Greece, they went to New England to tour the foliage or something for 10 days. And they flew from New England to South Bend, and my kids flew from San Diego and met them in South Bend. And so it was the first time the whole family was going to participate in SC Notre Dame game.
Okay. And is that something that, was there something in the past that, where talked about that being an important time?
Yes, it was something we had always looked forward to, and we had other friends that we knew in college who were married and had children, and they were looking forward to it. And that was the year our friends came from other places in the country with their now college-age children. See, Kim was college age, and so our friends' firstborns were college age, and it was a big reunion of all these people who had been to Notre Dame as students.
Okay. And was there some document or something where that became important as to?
That was one of the goals that Dan had in life for us, that we could afford to go out to dinner, that we could afford to have a sofa, that we could afford to take the whole family to the SC Notre Dame game and not worry about the bill.
Okay. Now, you've referred to the marriage encounter before. Was that something that was present in the marriage encounter?
Yes, that's the only place I had in writing that Dan said, when he made all his money and if I gave him more time, he'd make all his money. And if he made all his money, then we'd have all these things. And there's a list of all these things he wanted us to have. And that's very prominently listed as one of the things we'd enjoy as fruits of our labor.
Okay. Now, that was you didn't go to the game, obviously.
Correct.
And how did you feel about that?
I felt cut out. I love Notre Dame games, and it's been a very long tradition for me and Dan. And I dressed the kids all up, especially Kim, because going back there, everybody's dressed real nice, and it can be chilly. So I outfitted her especially for that weekend. And I went to Warner Springs Ranch by myself just to kind of get out of my house and do stuff. And I watched the game on a big screen TV at Warner's just to see if it was snowing or raining or freezing cold, and see if my kids were going to be warm enough at the game, because the weather can do anything in Indiana at that time. And so I was watching the game, and it was a beautiful sunny day, and I'm sure I didn't see them on TV, but I looked, and I'm sure they had a wonderful time.
What was your emotional condition like?
I was real sad. I wanted to be there.
Okay. During that, was there a problem with Kim in regards to the Notre Dame game?
Yes, when she came home, she said that they were at dinner. We're talking large crowds of people now, friends and children and stuff. And Kim, because of her age, wanted to be included in the adults. She didn't want to sit at the kiddie table with Danny and Rhett and the other cousins. They're like under 13 years old. So Kim was sitting at a dinner table next to her grandparents from Pittsburgh, and she never sees them. So she was sitting there, and then Dave Monahan's girlfriend said, I need this seat, Kim, you go sit with the kids. And she burst into tears at Notre Dame and said, I'm not sitting with the kids. And she wanted to take a taxi cab back to the hotel. She was real mad at Dan, and she conveyed all of that to me when she got home.
Did you go on the trip with Mr. Wright?
Yes.
And was that just the two of you, a large group?
It's an annual trip of a large group of racing sailors. They race, and they go down to that yacht club in Acapulco, and they challenge that yacht club. And that yacht club at another time comes up here. Did that answer your question?
Yes. Did you see your sons that weekend?
No, I didn't. I called them from Acapulco, but I didn't see them.
Now, so it would have been, with the change in the weekends, did it end up being a 3 or 4 weeks since you'd last seen your children?
Yes.
Okay, and were you having trouble contacting them at that time?
Well, the machine was on again with Linda's voice. And I heard that the ringers were turned off again. And the babysitter did verify that to me, that when she came to work, ringers were being turned off again. And that meant they were turned off the night before and the whole day until the maid got there at noon.
Okay. Now,
so they were playing games again.
Now, during that, before that, when you received any support from Dan in the months preceding that, had anything happened with deductions and support payments?
Yes, Dan had fined me again for something he said that I did, but I didn't do it.
Okay. And did you receive anything in the mail that you had received before?
Yes, the same wrinkle cream and weight loss things that I'd received years earlier. The exact same ad, so it obviously was the same person, in unmarked envelopes again, and I just saved it and wrote on it, "Save for attorney."
Okay. Did you try to plan a Halloween party for the boys when you got back?
No, before I left, I tried to have Dan agree that the boys would spend Halloween with me. They had spent Halloween with me the year before, and we had a great time. So we were going to do it again, and Dan said no.
Okay. Did you go to the school that year?
Yes.
And why was that?
Well, I went every year, but my boys didn't have costumes.
Okay. Now, when you went to school that that year. Is there something that they do at that school where the children wear costumes?
Yes, it's a wonderful school, and they make a big deal about every holiday. And the Halloween big deal is you have this parade with microphones, and he asks everybody, "Who are you?" and elaborate costumes, and everybody gets a prize. And it's really fun. It's a real cute school.
Was there one child there without a costume?
Yes,
And who was that?
Rhett didn't have a costume.
Was there, did you at any point in time receive calls from Kim in regards to her school situation?
Yes, constantly.
And what did she say anything about problems that she was having with her father in school?
Kim always had problems with getting money from her father, even the first year of school. She was constantly short of money and
It's
hysterical.
non-responsive.
Sustained.
At that time, did she call with money problems from school?
It was more than money problems, but yes,
Had this been something that had happened in the past?
yes.
Okay. And what was she telling you about the money problems that she was having?
She told me that she had no rent. She had nowhere to live. She had no rent money. She had no transportation money. She had no food money. That Dan had thrown her out of the house earlier and would not give her any money unless she was registered in school. Now, Kim had messed up the previous year and missed her exams, and she didn't get credit for the previous year. So she was in limbo that semester and had to go back there and take the exams from the previous spring that fall. But Dan would not give her money unless she was a registered student, and she was not technically a registered student. But I said, well, how are you supposed to live? And that was her problem. So she was working in a bus station, she told me, to earn money, but she was only getting $5 an hour, and it wasn't enough. So would I help her was the phone call.
Was she upset?
She was very upset. She didn't have any money. She had nothing to eat. That's what she kept telling me. She had nothing to eat, nowhere to live, nothing to drive, and she was only making $5 an hour, and she couldn't make enough money to get a place to live. And so and she said to me, how was she supposed to take her exams if she didn't even have a place to sleep?
Did she talk about Greece at all?
Yes, she meant it was through her that I knew that Dan took all these people to Greece and that he paid for it.
Okay. And was she upset about that?
And Reedy O'Neill's too, yes.
What about Reedy O'Neill?
Reedy O'Neill's was the opening of a big Irish bar here in town, and Dan was a quarter owner of it, and it was supposedly worth $5.8 million. There was a picture in the newspaper that Dan was an owner of this bar. And so it was obvious to Kim and to myself on this phone conversation that Dan had plenty of money for everything else, but he wasn't going to give her any.
Okay. Now, during the first week that when you came back from the trip from Acapulco, were you doing anything in regards to the condo in your home?
Yes, I got a decorator, and she sent a workman in and tore the condo apart and was going to replace shelves and replace carpeting, and she tore that up, and she tore up the tile in the entry. And she was real good about tearing stuff up, but I wrote checks for half deposits on the replacement items, and I couldn't get her to perform at all. And so the condo was torn up, but nothing was replaced.
Okay. Were you, at some point in time, were you moving out of your house and trying to move into the condo?
Yes, it was all happening at once. Yes, I just moved personal things out of the house and was living at the condo.
Were you, did you have any problems with any of the appliances at the condo?
Rhett was visiting me one day. It was during the Greece trip. It was probably the first day of the Greece trip, and he used the other bathroom in the condo for a bathtub or something. Anyway, he couldn't get hot water. So I went down in the garage to look at the hot water heater, and the light had gone out on it. And it was the first time I had done anything with it, and I had a match or something in it. The water heater didn't blow up in my face, but the gas kind of poofed in my face, and I had all singed eyelashes, and my hand was burnt.
Okay. Now, during this period of time when you're talking to Kim about the Notre Dame game and talking to her about the school, was there anything that you were reading? Did you read anything at that time?
Just the marriage encounter about all these different things.
And what was the purpose in reading the marriage encounter?
Same purpose as it always was. It's I wasn't crazy. And that the life that Dan promised would come if I gave him more time about neglecting the children and me. The life that he promised us to come did in fact come. He got the big boat he wanted. He got to go to Notre Dame with the family. He got the piano for Kim. Every single item. Check, 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 check. He did get everything he promised us.
Is that something that you read from time to time when things weren't going well?
Yes.
Did you receive any legal mail that week?
Yes.
Okay. And did you remember getting some letters? Near the end of the week.
Are we in November now?
Yes, we're in November.
Yes. Well, Walter Mon told me that Dan was not cooperating with the custody, and the October hearing was now put off. So not only was September put off, but now October was put off, and there was not even a further date given. It was just put off indefinitely. And so Dan was starting to resist and fight the custody thing, and I was getting mail from Walter Mon concerning a custody fight.
And in showing you what's been marked as People's 27. Have you seen that letter before?
Yes.
Okay. Now, at the end of the, were you supposed to have the boys the weekend of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th of November? Would have been Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of November of 1989.
Yes.
Okay. And did in fact you have the boys that weekend?
Yes.
And did you at some point in time get some mail in regards to the custody?
Yes.
Do you remember which day that you got that mail?
No, I think it was Friday.
Okay. Did you remember what you did with the mail at the time that you got it?
I just put it on the kitchen counter. I get all kinds of categories of mail. I get bills that go one place and legal stuff that go another place and junk mail that goes in the trash. But this pile was on the kitchen counter.
What if you opened it up and looked just quickly to see what it was?
Probably.
Okay. And did the boys spend the weekend with you?
Yes.
Okay. And Friday night, do you remember what you did?
We went to a football game at Danny's high school after school. And then the boys said we went to Old Town for dinner, but I didn't really remember that.
Did you go to with the boys anywhere on Saturday?
Yes, Rhett had a soccer game in the morning, and we were sleeping at the house for the weekend so the boys could have the benefits of the house, but the soccer uniform ended up at the condo, so we had to Saturday morning go up to the condo to get the soccer outfit. And then we did grocery shopping, we did haircuts, we went by the beach and we saw PJ, and then we went home and cooked all the food that I bought that afternoon.
Come on, Red, will you approach Sidebar?
Certainly.
Well, while the judge and the lawyers are talking where we can't hear them, gives us a chance to talk for a minute. Let's talk a little bit about the quality of this, in the tone of this direct examination.
Okay, the direct examination, when a lawyer has their client or their witness on the stand, the real goal is to get the story out in as crisp and as sharply focused a fashion as possible. After all, this is your chance to tell your side of the story, literally your day in court. So you want to make sure that you're not all over the place, that whatever your points are, the jury's going to understand them. In many ways, a good direct is like reading a real good book. Each chapter has a heading, and here are the points under that heading. And then you know when the attorney switches to the next topic, because there's an introductory question that says, now let's talk about the gun. When did you buy the gun? Where did you keep the gun? How did you keep the gun? Where did you finally put the gun? Then we move to the next topic, et cetera, et cetera. That really is the purpose of a direct. Directs usually, although not all the time, are best when they are short and sweet, because the jury can then focus on it and move out of it. Now, this is a complicated trial. There's a lot of information you have to get out. But remember, the core of the defense here is, what was her mindset at the moment she shot these two people? So one of the things you want to find in this direct after each subject heading is some reference by question to how did you feel about that? And we saw a little example of that with the South Bend, Indiana trip where
The football game.
where he said to her at the end of going through, he says, and how did you feel about that? And you can almost see her break down where she said, well, I was left out of that. That was a very emotional time. It was a tradition in our family. I couldn't go. And after all, isn't that what he's going to argue to the jury, that this is one of the things that contributed to her emotional state?
I don't want to beat up on Jack Early because it's a whole lot easier sitting here watching than it is doing it.
Absolutely.
But one does feel that we're jumping around subject to subject a little bit.
Well, you're right. It's hard to beat up on anybody, and you certainly don't want to do that, because he may very well have some very great master plan in mind that we don't see at the moment. On the other hand, the real goal all the time has to be the jury. Those are the people who decide. So you want to make sure you're communicating to them in as simple, straightforward a manner as possible. And we saw one example, which we didn't quite understand, where he was going along, he had referred to the gun earlier, and then all of a sudden jumped back into the gun, and then went on to another topic. It was sort of like the gun was inserted as an afterthought.
Because you really do. This is a very emotional story that Betty Broderick was telling. And as you get swept up in it, and it's almost like changing gears, but doing it badly sometimes.
In fact, we were talking about it, and you said if you had to plot this on a graph, you'd be going like this, up and down with the witness. Sometimes she's very emotional and soft.
Very focused.
Right, and focused, and she gives you a good answer. And then there are other times when you ask her a question, and she seems very hard and very almost cutting in her response. And this kind of up and down is going to have an effect on this jury.
Well, it's interesting, too, because sometimes a story or a vignette is sort of dropped in, parachuted. Suddenly, in the middle of a line of questioning, we had this story about the party that her daughter Kim had allegedly, according to Betty Broderick, had at the house. And you, if you're a juror, I'm wondering, if you're not wondering, what's that doing here?
You know, why was that inserted? What point were you trying to make, and how does that fit into the grand scheme of things? The other point that you want to make about a direct, and this is an intangible that has nothing to do with how you ask the question. Remember, if you are at a party, and this has happened to all of us, and you're talking to somebody who's rather dull or boring, you tend to adopt the manner of the person who's talking to you. On the other hand, if the person you're talking to is animated and lively, you tend to become more animated and lively in your response. That's very important in a courtroom when you're questioning witnesses, particularly if it's your own witnesses. You want your witness to be lively, but not too lively. You certainly don't want your witness to be there moving along either unevenly or monotonally. So it's important how the attorney, and we should watch for this, not only in this case, but in most cases, how does the attorney's manner of asking questions affect his or her witness? Very important thing to watch.
Let's go back to court and watch for some of these points that Marvin Schechter's just clued us into. Let's go back to court.
For the whole evening?
No, I didn't mean to. I just couldn't sleep, and so I got up, and it seemed like I'd stay up. I went in the kitchen, and
What was it like outside? Was it light, dark?
getting light, which is probably why I stayed up. But I didn't know if I would have stayed up, and I would crawl back to bed and go to sleep again. I couldn't take a shower. I knew that because Rhett was in my room that would have awakened him.
What did you do when you got up?
Mrs. Broderick is talking about a weekend that her two young sons, Rhett and Danny, spent the weekend with her.
Bar stool we have.
Did you start to do anything?
I started to read a newspaper. the bar stools are on this side of the bar, and the newspaper was where the bar stool is.
And what did you do?
Well, I started just looking at the newspaper, but I was too tired to even read it. It was just something to do, and I wasn't concentrating or anything. And then I saw the legal papers sitting there, and so I picked up the legal papers.
Okay. Did you, were these the papers that you had received on Friday?
Yes.
Okay. And what did you do with those legal papers?
I read them for the first time.
Okay. Was there a reason that you didn't read them through when you first got them?
I didn't have to read them through. It just looked like the same stuff I'd always gotten.
Okay.
No, I didn't read them through.
And what was it that you received?
This letter, and a cover letter from Walter Mond. This letter arrived in an envelope from Walter Mond.
Okay. And what did the letter say to you?
The letter said to me,
Don't read the letter. Just tell me what you remember the letter saying to you.
it said to me that you're going to jail, that you're going to be fined, that Linda's going to screw around with the machine again and keep you from your sons for the next 2 weeks, going to play her games again, and it's going to drive you crazy, and that's why she's doing it, to create contempt orders, that I was going to have to go back into the system, that Dan Broderick was now going to do to Walter Mond what he did to Tricia Smith, is that I hired Mr. Mond to do a custody fight, and we're going to drop the custody fight and play this contempt game again. It meant that that seeing the boys was going to be put off and put off and put off, and I just stood there and I felt so sorry for my boys, that they were missing everything in childhood. And I already mentioned that Danny was 13, and so the older the kids get, and we miss all these things like Halloween and stuff. Those moments are forever gone, and they're never coming back. And so this meant to me that I was not going to get the kids for the whole school year, probably, and that I was going to have to waste money fighting in court about stupid things, and that Dan was just going to jerk me around and mess up the money, undoubtedly, with the fines. And then I had the condo going, I had the house going, and I was in flux here, and I had a third mortgage going. And so if he fined me like he used to fine me and take the money away, all these moves that I was making to get control of my life and make decisions were totally dependent on that monthly check. And if he pulled the monthly check, everything would come crashing down. I was very resentful of what he was doing to Kim. When I hung up that phone, I said, Kim, don't worry, Kim, I'll take care of it. No problem, I'll take care of it. And then I hung up that phone to that son of a bitch treating my kids like that, because this was our oldest child, and I thought she should be in the finest college instead of being jerked around by an asshole. And
How was your mental condition then?
I had been beaten down for so long, so many times, that I felt that all the resources a person draws on when they're in trouble, that I had over the years exhausted all those resources. I couldn't, it was 6 years into this, I couldn't call my family and say, oh, Mom, look what he's doing to me now. I couldn't turn to any friends and for help. I had already tried every civil agency in this town. I had tried child abuse. I had tried battered women. I had tried the district attorney's office for help. I had tried the city attorney's office for help. I had called the ACLU. I had called HALT. I had called NOW. When you're in trouble and you're looking for help and you're crying for help and screaming for help, you try all these avenues, and I had already exhausted those avenues. I had a holy card on the wall in the kitchen that kept me going through a lot of really hard times, and it said that, God will not give you more than you can handle. And so whenever I thought it was just more than I could handle, I looked at that card and I thought, I can do this. And I was in Al-Anon and Course in Miracles, and they were like, one day at a time, and I really had that, don't stress about the future. Just, you can handle it one day at a time. And so when I looked at that card, I just said, I can't handle it. That card isn't helping me.
this is more than I can handle. I just cannot be reduced back to the fines and to the court and to the threats and to the contempts and to the pull the money out and watch her go crazy and watch everything fall apart. I felt so victimized, and then I was angry, and this is all happening at once in my brain. You know, I'm explaining it one thing at a time now, but it's all happening at once, and it's like, why are they doing this? Why the hell are they doing this to me now? Why can't they just leave me alone? Why can't they let me get control of my life and get my kids and just have a peaceful, normal life? I didn't know what kind of sick jollies they were getting out of driving me crazy. And I was saying to myself, you know, what do they want out of me? What the hell do they want out of me now? What do I have that they want? And the only answer I could come up with was that they wanted to just drive me crazy. It was sadistic what they were doing. There was nothing else that I could give these people to get away from them. And I just went out of the house. I was going to go down to the beach.
How would you describe how you were? Did you feel depressed, happy?
No, I believe she's just described.
Physically, can you describe, was there any physical?
I've been physically beaten down through this whole thing. I couldn't handle being sued from the day one. I didn't know how to protect myself or defend myself. And every time legal papers came, I felt they were an attack. And I was scared, and I felt that I couldn't personally defend these things. And I tried the legal system, and I tried lawyers, and I tried myself, and I tried going to his house. And as I say, I just exhausted all of these avenues for coping with things.
Now, would those feelings have a physical effect on you at all?
Yes, in the pictures that you can see over the years, I didn't even look. I didn't even physically look like the Betty Broderick I used to be in 1985, not to mention 83 when this started. I was turning 42 years old on November 7th of 1985. No, I'm sorry, 1989. And that would have been the anniversary of me slitting my wrists in 1983. And I'm thinking, God, I was slitting my wrists in 1983. This is 1989, 6 years later, and it's gotten nothing but worse. I can't make this stop. I cannot get out of this mess that Dan started in 1983.
You said that you left. Why did you leave?
Because I couldn't even stand up. I was just like this, and I just didn't know what to do. And I didn't know who to call. I didn't know where to go, and I just didn't know what to do. So I just went out of the house. When you go down to the beach, there's a lot of air. And when you're feeling like I felt, you hyperventilate a lot, and you feel like you can't get a breath. And so you go down to the beach because of all the air, just to make yourself feel better and walk along or something, or just sit on the bench or something. But it was basically to get the air.
Now, how would you describe your thinking, and then was it a clear thinking?
I've already described, I've tried to say what was going through my mind, but it was all going through my mind at once.
Did you, when you went down to the beach, did you write something before you went to the beach? Before you left, did you write something on the letter?
Well, I initially was going to answer the letter to Miss Cafaro, who supposedly this letter was from, because she was Dan's employee that was supposedly taking over the case.
Showing you People's 29, did you in fact start to write a letter?
I don't remember now doing these things, but now that we have stuff in front of us, that is the letter I wrote that morning.
Okay. Did you write something after writing that letter? Did you then write something on the letter that you received?
Yes, I tried to write a more businesslike letter to Miss Cafaro. And I don't even know what it says now unless I read it. And then I just gave up. And I wrote a suicide note and left it on the kitchen counter like this. And it just says, I can't take this anymore. And then it says 3 things that I can't take anymore. Do you want me to read them?
Yes.
Number one, Linda Colkina, the cunt, interfering with what little contact I have left with my children. She's been doing it for years. We've litigated it continuously. Number two, the constant threats of court, jail, contempt, fines, etc., which is very scary to me, and no matter what the evidence, I always lose. Number three, them constantly insinuating I'm crazy. The last sentence of this letter says that her emotional disturbance and mental disease, it says that they're not improving. And that just, that's the same thing that he'd been telling me since 1983, is that I'm emotionally disturbed and I have a mental disease. And it was never that. It was just that I couldn't stand getting attacked like this. And so it appeared that I was crazy or upset, and I was, but it was situational craziness. If they would just leave me alone and let me have a life, I'd be fine.
Did you end up going to the beach?
I left the house to go to the beach. I never got to the beach, no.
And why was that?
Because I was going to go down to the beach. That was the first thought. Just go to the beach, just get the air. And then I thought I was just going to fucking blow my brains out. I said, no, let's not do that. That's not what's good for the boys. We're going to go over, we're going to talk to Dan. We're going to just try one more time to talk to Dan, to tell him to give me the kids and just leave us alone. He doesn't even have to give me any money, just leave us alone. So I went over to talk to Dan.
Okay. What were you going to do when you went to Dan's?
I was going to ask him for the kids and to just leave me alone. And if he wouldn't agree at all, I was just going to kill myself in his house, not down at the beach and not at my house. And I had been contemplating suicide for a long time. It's in the diaries. I was extremely despondent in what was going on in my life here because I couldn't handle it. And I knew that if I killed myself, it was going to be in front of Dan Broderick so that he couldn't just say, see, I told you she was crazy. I had nothing to do with it.
Were you angry at yourself at that time for not being able to do things with the children, getting them out of this?
Objection, Your Honor, reading.
Same.
Were you angry at anybody at that time at all?
Yes, when you feel that you're victimized like I did, you have a lot of self-hate because you can't handle what's going on. And I was mad at myself for not being able to handle this. And I had promised those children for years, don't worry, kids, I'll take care of this. I'll get the lawyer, I'll get the psychiatrist, I'll do what we have to do. Don't worry, kids, I'll take care of this. And they told me to hire Walter Mond, and I disappointed them again because I promised them by this September they'd be living with me. And I promised and been unable to live up to my promises for so many times. And then on this day, I just felt that I had absolutely failed those kids. I could not get them. And I tried and I wasn't going to get them. We were going to play this game instead. And the kids were going to be very disappointed in me. And it was important to me that I protected my kids and did what I promised them I'd do.
Now, where was the gun at that time?
In the purse, in the car.
Okay. And did you ever at times carry that gun in that purse?
I didn't actually carry the purse very much. It would stay in the car because it was a big purse. And if I went shopping, I'd take a checkbook or I'd take a credit card or something. But the purse usually just stayed in the car.
Was there a reason that you put the gun in the purse at times?
To hide it from Danny and Rhett, yes.
They
were fascinated with it. I didn't want any accidents. They didn't listen to my first admonitions that if you touch this, I'll kill you. And they touched it, and I was afraid someone was going to get hurt.
When they were over there, did they ever look for it?
They were fascinated with it. I don't know if they actually looked for it, but I would believe that they probably did.
Now, when you went over to Dan's house, it was early in the morning?
Yes.
Okay. And did you took the gun with you? Did you take the gun with you when you got to Dan's house, did you take the gun with you?
Yes.
And what was the purpose of taking that?
Every time I went to Dan's house and in the past, I'd get this, 10 seconds or I'm going to call the police. Or once I got there to talk to Dan and Linda was in the window saying, you want me to call the police and stuff? So I brought the gun with me initially to make them have to talk to me. And if they said they were going to call the police, I'd say, no, you're not.
Did you plan to do anything if they didn't talk to you?
I told you, yes. If they wouldn't deal with me and wouldn't give me the kids, I was just going to kill myself.
Did you have in your car any keys that you thought might fit one of the doors at Dan's house?
Yes, I had a key ring with a funny looking key on it.
Okay. Was it because of the shape of the key that you thought it was that it would fit Dan's house?
It was a very strange looking key, and long before I was informed, or the kids told me, that Dan's keys were very funny looking, and I knew Dan had funny looking keys. It was a good chance that was his funny looking key.
Okay. Did you use the key to get into the house?
Yes.
Okay. And what were you going to do if the key didn't work?
Got in the house anyway. We always got in the house.
Did you want to wake Dan up when you got there? And when you first got there, did you want Dan to know that you were driving up?
Sustained.
What was your feelings about Dan knowing that you got there?
I wanted him to know I was there and that I had the gun before he jumped on a phone and reported me, which is what he would have done if he saw me coming from the street or if I rang the front doorbell.
Did you ring the doorbell at all?
No.
Do you remember which door you went into?
The utility door of the house, which is mostly the traffic door.
Do you remember driving to his house that day?
No.
And do you know what route you took?
I remember leaving my house, backing out of the driveway and leaving. I remember that, but I don't remember at which point I decided where I was when I decided not to go to the beach and go to Dan's house. All the way to Dan's house, I was just thinking, I've just got to make this stop. I'm not going to live another day like this. I can't wake up just being absolutely at his mercy anymore. So all the way there, I just kept thinking, I've got to make this stop. And I don't remember what even road I took to get there.
How would you describe, was it affecting you physically? I mean, were you clear thinking and seeing things clearly at that time?
The only way I can explain it.
Sustained.
How would you describe how the world seemed to you at that time?
Sustained.
Well, Your Honor, I would like to make an offer of proof why it hasn't been.
Another question.
If I'm referring to how she was physically seeing the world at that time, it may be different than she's answered before.
Oh, all right, go ahead. You can answer that.
The only way I know how to describe it now is that there was all these thoughts just churning in my head, and there was so much going on inside my head. That's kind of like my eyeballs were turned backwards and the whole world was inside my head because of all this anguish. And so I wasn't seeing where I was going, and it was like I was just inward, and there was all this anguish and kind of darkness and crazy thoughts. Felt like you were in hell, actually.
Okay. When you got to the house, went in the back door, do you remember where you went?
I got upstairs. I know that, but I don't know which route I took.
Okay. And when you went upstairs, do you remember where you went when you got to the top of the stairs?
The door to the bedroom was closed, but the next door was open, so I went in that door.
Okay. And where does that door lead to?
To what they call a TV room, but it's part of the bedroom suite on that side of the house.
Okay. And was anybody up at that time that you saw?
No.
Okay. Do you remember, were you holding the gun at that time?
I don't remember. I guess so.
Okay. What did, when you went into the TV room, what was the next thing that you did?
The TV room door was wide open, and then the door to their bedroom was part open. It wasn't closed. It was like a jar.
Okay. And did you go into that? Did you then go into their bedroom?
Yes.
Okay. And what did you do when you went into their bedroom?
Well, the motion that I made, although I don't think it was a big motion, the movement that I made into their bedroom woke them up, and they moved, and somebody screamed, "Call the police," and I said, "No," and I just fired the gun, and this big noise went off, and then I grabbed the phone and got the hell out of there. But I wasn't even in that room. I mean, it just was an explosion. Just, I moved, they moved, the gun went off, and it was like, ah! And it was that fast.
I want to go through this. I want to go at least as much as we can, step by step. How would you describe your memory of that event? Do you have a clear memory of everything that happened?
What I can tell you in words now is it seems like a slideshow where slides are missing. You know, I remember driving up to the front of the house. I remember the front of the house, but I don't remember if I went to the front door, and I don't remember going around. And then I know I was upstairs, and I remember opening the door to the bedroom. So I see myself doing that, but then I don't see anything else. And then I know I grabbed the phone, but I don't remember leaving the house or running down the stairs or anything. So it's like there's these spots missing. It's like a flash of this, and then she's over there, and there's a flash of that, a flash of this. And that's what I told people later is, you know, I didn't see anything in that room.
Now, when you first went into the door, do you remember do you remember what happened when you first went into the door of the bedroom?
Well, I hardly even got in. I opened the door and I stepped into the bedroom, like one step.
What did you do at that point?
Well, I was gonna say, you know, Dan, wake up, I have to talk to you.
Did you say something?
I don't know.
What happened at that point?
I walked in and they moved away from me toward the other place, and I heard Linda say, "Call the police."
Now, do you remember them talking to you at all? Saying something to you other than
No, nobody said anything to me, I don't think.
Okay. And what happened when they went towards, what's the next thing you remember after they went towards the phone and said, "Call the police"?
I kind of like screamed, like this huge scream, like, "No!" And the gun went off. And I just remember one time and one noise. But I know that I must have done that because you have to do that on the gun. But it was so fast. I just went, ah!
Now, did you scream out loud?
I felt like I made a huge scream, but I don't know if I made any noise. It was just all sensation. You move in, and then they moved, and then it was this huge explosion and scream and all at once.
Do you remember actually pulling the trigger?
No.
Is that a gun where you have to pull the trigger?
Yes, I asked people that day, "Do you have to pull the trigger?" And they told me that you had to, but I don't remember pulling it even the first time.
But you remember a large bang?
Yes.
Okay. What's the next thing you remember after that?
Is grabbing the phone so that he couldn't get on it because Dan was trying to get on the phone, and grabbed the phone, and I tried to get out of the room, and it kind of jerked, and I jerked it back and pulled it out of the wall, and I think I threw it on the top of the stairs. I don't know. I may have just put it there.
Now, after you heard the boom, were you out of bullets?
I assume so, yes,
And how did you know that?
because there was no more noise and the gun was clicking.
Okay. Did you hear the gun click?
I don't remember the gun clicking, no.
Okay.
I just know that there was this huge noise and then there was no more noise.
And then after the noise, when you said the gun was clicking, was that after the noise? The clicking sound of the gun?
I guess.
Objection, Your Honor. She stated she didn't remember anything.
Sustained.
Do you remember pulling the trigger after? Do you remember pulling the trigger at all?
No.
What did you, now, when you indicated, when was it that you thought about what was the thought about the phone that made you grab the phone?
Objection asked to me.
Sustained.
May I have that read back to me, Your Honor, so I can, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Was there any reason that you were scared that Dan was going to grab the phone?
Yes, because every time I went to talk to him, he'd call the police and have me arrested on the restraining order for trying to talk to him, for being within 100 yards of his house.
And now at that point in time, when you left, do you know whether anyone was hit?
No, I thought Dan was after me.
Okay. And did Dan say, do you remember Dan sitting up in bed and saying, okay, you shot me, I'm dead?
No,
Have you ever said that? Have you ever repeated that to anybody?
I know Lily says I said that. So I must have said that, but I heard Lily say I said that. I don't remember that.
Okay. And have you repeated it since then to people?
Yes,
And why was that?
because Lily said I said it. It must have happened. Or I must have said it.
Do you remember where you went after that?
Well, I had nowhere to go. I mean, I was afraid Dan was after me. I was afraid when I went into that house of confronting Dan, and then when I left, I thought he was after me. And so I thought, oh man, you can't go home because he's gonna call the police, and the police are gonna be waiting at my house. And I didn't want to scare the boys and everything, so I didn't go home. So I ended up at a phone in Claremont, at a gas station in Claremont.
Do you know how long?
And I didn't know what to do or where to go or who to talk to or what to do.
Do you remember how long you drove around before you got to that gas station?
No,
How long were you at that gas station?
I still don't even know where the gas station was. It's somewhere in Claremont.
Okay, but when you arrived at the gas station, were you there very long?
I don't remember.
Did you make a call right away?
I don't remember if it was right away. I did remember, I remembered one phone number.
Okay, and did you call some people from the gas station?
I only remember dialing and calling and talking to Diane Black.
Do you remember calling Lee?
Yes, later.
When you called, where did you go from there? Did you go over someone's house?
I called Lee and I told her I was in trouble or something. I don't remember really what I told her. But I said that I'll try and get to your house. And if I don't get to your house, that means they've arrested me because the Suburban is real big and there weren't many cars out on a Sunday morning. And it has a load 'em up license plate. That's what it says. So it'd be real easy to get pulled over. And I said, if I don't arrive, honey, it's because the police got me. But I'll try and get to your house. So I went to Lee's house. And the reason for that is Dan didn't know where Lee lived. So if he was sending the cops to get me, he couldn't send them to Lee's house because he didn't know where Lee lived. Nobody knew where Lee lived except me.
When you got to Lee's house, how would you describe how you felt?
Well, whenever, especially this day, I felt bad that I was involving her. But at the same time, I tried to pretend like everything was okay. I guess, I don't know. I got there, I remember I took my camera out of the car. I gave her my camera and I told her that I shot this gun at Dan's house and I have to go give myself into the police. So I took off all my jewelry and stuff, but I know I did that, but I don't remember doing it. And then I sent Lee from her apartment to go check on Danny and Rhett because I was worried that the cops were there and that the boys were afraid and stuff. So Jason and Lee went to check on Danny and Rhett.
Did you eventually turn yourself in that day?
Yes.
And were you taken to jail after you were arrested? Were you taken
Yes,
after after you turned yourself in, were you eventually taken to Las Colinas?
Yes.
And have you had conversations with a number of people since you've been in jail?
Yes.
When you first got to jail, how were you feeling?
I don't remember getting taken there. I know they put me in a suicide cell, stark naked for the first night I was there. And I was real shocking, and I don't remember being there or much of what happened. I just went where people told me to go.
Now, that first day or the first couple of weeks that you were there, how were you feeling emotionally or mentally?
It's hard to I was very confused, but I was safe in jail. You know, they locked the rest of the world out when they locked me in this little corner cell. And that was good for me because then Dan couldn't get me. And I could just be safe in there, and I really liked that nobody could get me.
Yes.
One more.
Sure.
How much longer are you going to be?
Not very long, Your Honor, 5 or 10 minutes.
It's okay to keep going.
The first 2 or 3 months that you were in jail, were you able to come to grips with what had happened?
No, I wanted to. I wasn't able to deal with it. I wasn't able to hug my children or talk to my children. I wasn't able to go to Dan's funeral. I wasn't able to tell anybody how sorry I was that all this had happened. Anybody who was affected by it. I haven't been able to get in touch with any of the people who matter in this case.
Were you able to talk to the boys about what was going on?
No, Dan's brother took them out of town right away, and I was kept from them for almost 2 years, and I wasn't allowed to send birthday cards or Christmas cards. I haven't had a phone conversation, but this summer in August, I was able to see them for an hour or two, but I wasn't allowed to mention anything. I had to act like that nothing had happened. So I really want to talk to my kids about this and to a lot of other people, but they listen to all my phone conversations and they copy every letter that goes in and out. And it's that, everyone's afraid everything will get twisted around and used against them. And so none of us have been able to deal honestly with a lot of the things that need to be dealt with.
I have no further questions, Your Honor. I do. I'm sorry, Your Honor. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I would like a picture marked as next in order, Your Honor.
Triple I.
Yes.
Eight by 10 black and white photograph, Mr. Early?
Yes, of the defendants.
All right. Somewhere.
Showing you what has been marked triple I for identification. Is this a picture of you?
Yes.
And is this what you came to look like at the time of your arrest in 1989?
Yes.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take our lunch recess at this time. I apologize for going into the lunch hour, but our sidebar was because we knew we were close to the end, and the attorneys and I felt it was better to finish up. But I hope I didn't inconvenience anybody by doing that, and if I did, I apologize. We'll be in recess until 2 o'clock?
The regular lunch hour.
2 o'clock? You want longer?
Yes.
It's 2 o'clock, all right. Recess till 2 o'clock. Please remember the admonition, don't to discuss the case among yourselves nor allow anyone else to discuss it with you nor form any opinions till it's finally submitted to you. See you at 2 o'clock. Thank you.
Isn't it true that when you talked to Deputy Woods, that you told Deputy Woods, for example, one day after testifying, that it was a good day today. I had the jury eating out of my hands.
No.
Deputy Woods was the deputy that was responsible for getting you prepared and ready to come to court each day, correct?
Yes.
And are you indicating that you never had any discussions with Deputy Woods about how you were impressing the last jury?
I don't remember those discussions. I don't remember any specific discussions about that.
Do you remember talking to her about how important it was for you to give the right impression to the jury and telling her about disagreements that you'd had with your counsel about what kind of clothes you should wear? And the fact that wearing bright clothes wouldn't be a good impression, it would make you look too happy, and that your counsel wanted you to only wear dark clothes and drab clothes to make you look depressed.
No, Deputy Woods ended up picking out.
Excuse me, if you just answer my question, did you ever have any conversation like that with Deputy Woods?
No.
You have been described by people who know you well as being a good actress, haven't you?
I've never heard that.
Never heard that Dr. Jacobson, the doctor that you saw for quite a period of time, described you as a great actress?
I've never heard that he said that, no.
That you had several different personas that you could
Your
display?
Honor, I'm going to object to this.
Same.
You indicated that just this morning before we broke, that you had not been able to tell anyone how sorry you were. It is true that since you've been in jail, in fact, very shortly after the time you were put in jail, that you started writing letters to people, right?
I've written letters from jail, yes.
You've written probably hundreds of letters from jail.
Maybe over the 2 years.
And even in the course of a couple of weeks to a couple of months, right after November the 5th, you wrote many letters every day to friends, to family, to newspaper reporters, to celebrities. You were writing many letters during those, let's take the 3 months after you were incarcerated, weren't you?
I don't remember specifically, but I have written letters, yes.
Well, you're not, are you disputing what I'm saying, that you have written probably at least 100 letters during that period of time?
In the 3 months after I was there, I wouldn't know. I don't know of the numbers.
Did you write many letters to your friends and to your family?
In that specific period of time?
Yes.
I don't remember in that specific period of time who I would have written to.
Did you write letters to newspaper reporters?
I corrected some articles. Yes, I corrected articles that I read that were wrong.
Okay. And did you write letters to celebrities, for example?
I don't know what you're referring
Did you write
to.
to Cindy Garvey?
Oh, I don't remember. Did I? I don't know.
There was nothing ever preventing you from saying anything about your feelings about what had happened in any of those letters that you wrote, was there?
No?
You were free to express your feelings about what had happened and how you felt about it, correct?
Yes.
And you had many phone calls, many phone conversations with people shortly after your incarceration, in which you were free to express your feelings about what had happened.
Well, I've already testified I wasn't free to express any feelings really because I knew the letters were copied coming in and going out and that the phone calls are listened to constantly. So I was, and even the visits are listened to. So everyone was pretty paranoid about that.
You were advised that the phone calls were not monitored. Your phone calls were never monitored. And you
Oh,
were
I don't
advised-
know that.
Are you saying that you felt that you couldn't express any of your feelings about what had happened because you felt that your letters were being monitored?
Yes.
And how would that hurt you or your case to say that you felt sorry for what you had done?
How would it hurt my case to say
How did
that?
the fact that you were being monitored prevent you from expressing your feelings like you've indicated? No one would let you express your feelings.
Because it just inhibited everything. I didn't know who would interpret those and get copies and switch everything around.
So are you indicating that you felt inhibited about talking to people about what occurred?
Yes.
You did write a letter, for example, to Amy Wallace shortly after you were in jail, correct?
That would have been one of the corrections of an article, I believe.
And in that letter, you start off by saying, I have pages and pages of notes setting the story straight, incident by incident, In most cases, you have the general idea, but the chronology and the facts are all twisted around. I'll call. We can talk. Neighbors and friends have bits and pieces. Only I know the whole truth. Are you saying that you were inhibited about telling her the whole truth as you saw it?
I was just correcting her article. Whatever she said that I felt was wrong, I wanted corrected.
Okay. Are you saying that you were inhibited about saying anything that you wanted to correct anything that had been
Yes.
written about you?
Yes, because I wouldn't have expressed the feelings that I'm talking about to a strange newspaper reporter.
While we're on this subject, we'll come back, but when you say that you were correcting things that had been written, in fact, you made a specific correction with Amy Wallace about what Dan Broderick had said after you shot him. You indicated that Lee, who had testified that he said, okay, you shot me, I'm dead.
Mhm.
You called up Amy Wallace and you told her, no, that's not right. That's not what he said. He said, okay, you got me, I'm dead,
Right.
correct?
Right.
Didn't you just testify before lunch that you didn't remember him saying anything to that effect?
I didn't remember him sitting up in bed and saying anything like that, no.
You don't remember
But I-
testifying last time?
But I remember,
Excuse me. Do you remember testifying the last time you testified that he put his hands up and he said, okay, you got me?
yes.
Didn't you just testify earlier today that you didn't remember him saying anything like that?
Well, I don't know. What I really testified to is I don't really know what happened in that room. It was all these flashes of things.
Excuse me, you answer the question. Let me just ask you this. If you don't really know what happened in that room, how was it you could write or call Amy Wallace and correct her about what had been said about what happened in that room?
Because at that time, way back then, I thought Dan said that.
Okay, so way back then, when you talked to Amy Wallace back in March of 1990, you had a clear recollection then of what had occurred in that room. Is that what you're saying?
No. In March, no. When Lee said that in the very beginning, in November, that I said that, we discussed it. I said, I couldn't have said that because she said I didn't know if I shot anybody, so he couldn't have said that.
Did you not call up Amy Wallace and tell her, correct her? He didn't say, you shot me, correcting one of her daughters. He said, okay, you got me.
Your Honor, that's been
Okay.
answered.
Sustained.
You called Amy Wallace anyway to correct what your daughter had said. Is that correct?
Your Honor, asked and answered.
Overruled, you can answer that, yes or no?
Yes, I guess, if you said I did.
And you talked to her about several corrections that you thought that had been in the press that you didn't think were correct, and you wanted to correct the record, right?
Yes.
And Amy Wallace was not the only reporter that you talked to shortly after committing these crimes, correct? You talked to many reporters.
I don't
Is that
remember if I talked. Other reporters came to talk to me.
Have you
John
given-
Gaines, I've spoken to John Gaines, but I don't know when that started.
Okay, you've indicated you've given interviews to John Gaines from the San Diego Union, correct?
Last year, yes.
And you gave an interview or several interviews to Alan Abrahamson from the LA Times, correct?
On the telephone,
On the telephone or in person? Did you give an interview with Alan Abrahamson?
I've spoken to him, yes.
And you've talked to Irene Schaefer from the La Jolla Light,
Oh, Irene doesn't work at the La Jolla Light.
okay? Did you talk to Cynthia Queen from the La Jolla Light?
Yes.
And you talked to a reporter from the New York Times?
Yes.
And you talked to a reporter, author who wrote an article in the Ladies' Home Journal?
I don't really remember
Kathleen
if I
Neumeyer?
spoke to her on the phone, maybe in New York.
You talked to Joyce Wadler from People Magazine?
No,
Did you give an interview to anyone from People
he
Magazine?
was a man.
Lorenzo Bennett?
I think that was his name, yes.
And in none of those interviews, those people have all written articles about what you've said. In none of those interviews did they ever say that you expressed any remorse for these killings, did they?
I don't know.
Are you indicating that you expressed remorse to these people and they didn't, and they said the opposite in their reports?
The remorse that I'm talking about was, what I was sorry for was to Dan's parents, to Dan's brothers and sisters and stuff. I haven't spoken to those people.
Was there
To
anything
Linda's
that,
family, I haven't spoken to them.
Mrs. Broderick, was there anything that prevented you from writing a letter to any of Dan's family or parents or any of Linda's family since the time that you committed these crimes?
Yes,
When you talked to the author from People magazine, which was just last month, isn't it true that you indicated absolutely no remorse, that Linda knowingly dated a married man, that you felt equally unconcerned about the death of your ex-husband? I wasn't the one who had the affair. I won't accept the blame for what happened. Didn't you say that?
I don't remember specifically saying that. If he says I said it, I said it.
Well, would you like me to show it to you to see if it refreshes your recollection?
No, I'm sure if it's written there, it says it.
You didn't have just one interview with Amy Wallace. You had numerous interviews with her, correct? Before she wrote a large article about you?
This was in the very beginning, so I would have talked to her. I don't remember how many times she might have come there, or I mostly talked to her on the phone, I think.
Is it correct when she describes that over the next 6 months you called and wrote often, always eager to talk?
Sure, I don't know.
I'm just asking you if that's a correct indication of how many times you talked.
6
to Amy
months from
Wallace.
when it happened to when she wrote the article.
Yes?
Probably yes.
And she too indicated in her article that described you as being intelligent, angry, and without remorse.
Were those her words?
Yes?
Well, if that's what she thought, that's what she thought.
Well, are you indicating that you indicated something different to her, that you expressed remorse
She
to her?
didn't give me an intelligence test. She didn't know if I had any remorse. Those are her words. She didn't know if I was any of those things.
Well, she described that when she talked to you the very first meeting, that you insisted that all your actions were justified. You said, quote, "He went off with the bimbo at 40 driving a red Corvette. Haven't we heard this before?" Did you say that to Amy Wallace?
I did say that.
You also told Amy Wallace that you were upset that people were mourning Dan and Linda. Didn't you?
I was upset at the way that the funeral was handled, yes.
You said it always makes me mad when people call them the victims. You're tired of hearing people mourn Dan and Linda. Did you say that?
I thought the way the funeral was handled was wrong.
And it wasn't that you were upset that you couldn't go to the funeral. What you were upset about, and that you expressed to several people, was that Dan had gotten full rights in the Catholic Church, and you didn't think that was appropriate because he was divorced.
No, I was very upset I didn't go to the funeral. I would have handled the funeral extremely differently, however.
Did you tell Amy Wallace that all of your actions were justified?
Referring to which all of my actions? I don't know. If she
Did
said
you
it
ever
was a
make that
quotation,
statement to Amy Wallace that all of your actions were justified?
I don't know.
And when you were in jail, you also made statements similar to the ones that you made to Maria Peralta. You made statements like that to other people. It wasn't just Maria Peralta that you talked about your feelings about Linda, correct?
Excuse me?
Did you make statements about your feelings about Linda to other people in jail?
I guess so. I mean,
Did you tell Deputy Woods, for example, similar to what you said to Maria Peralta, that Linda was, quote, a fucking bitch? She was living in my house, driving my car, sleeping in my bed.
Your Honor, I'll object. It assumes facts, not evidence.
Sustained.
I'm asking her if she said that.
Your Honor, it assumes facts, not evidence that those are Maria Peralta's words.
No, I'm talking about a statement you made to Deputy Woods.
Rephrase it.
Did you make a statement to Deputy Woods that Linda is a fucking bitch? She was living in my bed, driving my car, sleeping in my bed.
no, because those are not true, and I didn't make them to Maria Peralta, and I didn't make them to Deputy Wood.
Did you appear to Deputy Woods to be happy about what you had done and that you were going to get off?
During the 2 years that I've been there, I've appeared to be happy, I've appeared to be sad, I've appeared to be upset. If I appeared a certain way to Deputy Woods at a certain time, I'm sure during certain times I was there, I appeared to be happy, but she may not have known why.
In relation to killing Dan and Linda Broderick, did you appear to be happy about
No.
it? How about to Dr. Robinson, the psychiatrist that was there at Los Colinas jail?
I don't even know Dr. Robinson.
Dr. Robinson, he's a black gentleman, often wears a cap on his head.
I've never met Dr. Robinson. Never seen a man of that description.
Well, you've indicated that you've been happy at times in jail. In fact, you gave an interview to Alan Abrahamson where you told him that you wanted the world to know how happy you were in jail, right? Do you remember doing that?
I don't know if those were my words.
Do you remember telling him that you wanted everyone to know that you were doing fabulously well, that it's been wonderful? Prison is a country club?
No, because I was never in prison, and I wouldn't have said prison was a country club.
Would you have said that prison is a country club, a tennis court, swimming
Your Honor,
pool?
I'm going to object. It's irrelevant.
Sustained.
Would you have said anything to him about the fact that being in jail was early retirement?
Your Honor, I'm going to object.
Overruled. You can answer that. It's yes or no.
Maybe.
Would you have said to him that you don't have to worry about your car getting fixed? I can read, I can write, I can converse with people. No responsibilities?
There was a period of time after the
Excuse me,
first.
did you make that statement to Alan Abrahamson?
I may have.
And would that have been approximately March of 1991? Does that sound right to you?
Yes, it would be in the period I was trying to tell you about.
I want to back up and ask you a few questions about some of the things you said when you were describing your early married years with Mr. Broderick. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. You testified that during the time that you were in law school, or that Dan Broderick was in law school, you described an apartment that you lived in, and you described this very ugly, rotten place that you had to live in outside of Cambridge, right?
Correct.
You didn't tell us about the fact that during the second and the third year of law school, that you moved out to a very nice suburb in Marlborough and lived in a very nice apartment during
No, I
those
did
Your Honor,
state that.
objection. That is argumentative.
Sustained.
I said it had to do with getting a car, remember?
Okay.
Because we didn't have a car in the beginning, and I said we got a car, and then we moved.
And during the second and third year, then you lived in a very nice apartment complex in a very nice suburb. Is that correct?
Different places, because we had to move out in the summer to go to LA and come back to a different place. 2 different apartment complexes in Marlborough, Massachusetts, correct.
And it was about 40 miles away from Cambridge. Dan had to commute about 40 miles every day on his motorcycle to go to law school so that you and the children could be in a nice suburb, correct?
Yes, remember I said that. We had an apartment above ground.
Okay. And during that time, you had indicated, and you can correct me obviously if I'm wrong, but you indicated that you were totally isolated from people when you were living during those years in law school, correct? Didn't you say that?
Well, what kinds of people? There were other people living in the apartments that were adjacent to ours. I didn't know their names, and I didn't spend time with them, and I never met them. So I was not physically, there were other people there. I didn't happen to know them.
You testified that you were isolated though from
Yes, I
from
felt-
friends and people during the second, third year of law school?
I felt isolated, yes.
Isn't it true that you lived very close to a couple of good friends, the McCulloughs, who came over and visited you almost every weekend?
That was Dan's friend and his wife. Yes, we knew those people.
Jiggs McCulloch and Sandy McCulloch, they were good friends of yours as well, weren't they?
They became friends, yes.
And they would come over just about every weekend. They would visit. Dan and Jiggs would take care of the kids so that you and Sandy could go out shopping and have free time together. Now you said that one of the things that you were really looking forward to after you got married, one of the goals you had was to get to Europe, right?
Right.
Okay. And you did get to Europe in 1981. You were able to take a trip to Europe with Dan.
Right.
And then in 1983, you were able to take another trip to Europe with Dan.
Right.
So you reached those goals as far as things that you've been looking forward to do with Dan.
Mhm.
When was it that you took the Caribbean cruise with Dan?
Dan and I never took a Caribbean cruise.
Did you ever go to the Caribbean with Dan?
We went to the Caribbean on our honeymoon to St. Thomas.
Did you go to a trip to the Bahamas in the 1980s ever?
No.
How about a trip to Cancun
Yes, that was a Club Med trip into Mexico.
and a trip to Alisal?
That was a family trip to a ranch before we joined Warner's, yes.
And when was that trip to Alisal?
That was when I had 2 broken arms, so whenever we can put that in there.
It was in the late 70s?
No, it would have been after Rhett was born, so it was 80 or 81.
You said, you described the fact that Dan Broderick wouldn't let you be involved in the financial decisions and that he was very dictatorial about that. Isn't it true that you have previously said that you happily let him take over all of the decisions?
I've always said that, yes.
You said not being involved in the money saved me from a lot of anxiety, saved me from a lot of worrying.
That's exactly right, it did. And
So
I
that
never
was-
argued with that arrangement when we were married.
Okay, so it wasn't that Dan was being dictatorial and telling you that you couldn't have anything to do with the finances. It was something that you wanted him to take care of.
Well, I never asked him to do it, no. It was an unspoken agreement in our marriage from day one that he would handle the rent and the insurance and all those things. And it's what he called, women's work and men's work. I mean, that was the man earned the wages and paid the bills, and the woman took care of the food and the laundry and the children in the house, and never the twain shall meet. I didn't touch anything to do with the money, and he never had anything to do with the laundry or the kids or the food. That was women's work. But I did not argue with that arrangement.
And you were happy about that arrangement. That was,
That
an
was
arrangement that
our
you wanted.
arrangement, and it worked well for a very long time, yes. I did not argue about it.
You also indicated that Dan had always been an extremely hard worker, right?
Very much so, yes.
Always, from the
That's
very
right.
beginning.
Medical school, law school, everything.
So, and you described that he basically worked 7 days and nights a week. He'd fall asleep at night with a legal file in his chest and wake up in the morning and do it again.
Absolutely. Even when he was a student, he worked that hard.
So during the marriage, he wasn't out there squandering your money. He wasn't losing it in Vegas. He wasn't womanizing. He was providing for you and the children and the family.
Yes,
correct?
we both worked very hard, and we did without a lot for many years so that he could get his, yes. Those are all correct statements.
You indicated just recently this morning, I think, about how you were upset that you weren't able to realize some of the things that you had wanted, for example, a boat and the piano. I mean, those were all things that you had prior to separation, right?
Those were not the things that I wanted. Those were in Dan's marriage encounter as the list of things that he wanted as his possessions and material goals, I think he called them.
And you've talked about that by 1981, which would have been 4 years before you separated, you basically at that point had an unlimited budget. You had
No, not 81. That was 83. 81 is, the testimony was that was the first year we had any money, and by 82 we had nice money, and by 83, between 81 and 83, by 83 we had tons of money. So between 81 and 83 is when we started getting money. Before that, we had no money at all to speak of.
In 1979, when Dan Broderick was making $82,000 a year, you had no money to speak of?
when he was on his own and he had the expenses of, was that the corporate thing or the personal thing?
In 1979, when his personal income was $82,000 a year, you indicating you had no spending money?
Right.
I would like to,
I wouldn't have known that's what his income was anyway.
before there's cross-examination, I'd like to see documents that support this.
He has discussion on stuff.
You got your hand to show it to me?
In fact, it was 1979 that you put a pool in the house at Coral Reef, correct?
Yes, we got another mortgage on the house to do that. I think we did.
And did you not tell Jeanette DeWise, who you also interviewed with from the Reader, that by 1981 you felt you had an unlimited budget, you had a closet full of $2,000 dresses, you had a $10,000 formal gown?
No,
Dan had bought. When did Dan buy you the Lynx fur jacket?
I don't remember.
You don't remember? Okay.
No, I don't.
So it could have been at that period of time then.
But what you said previous was 80, after 83. I thought I've always said the same thing. 81, we started having money. That's why we went to Europe. But we went to Europe and switched houses and got you rail passes. It wasn't what you'd call a luxury
I understand. You've explained that. I
Okay,
understand.
so what you just said that I said to someone in 81 is incorrect. That's not right. I didn't have those things in 81.
Your Honor, I may have Martha's People's Exhibit next in order.
66.
66, a two-page document which indicates gross income of both Dan Broderick and Elizabeth Broderick for the period of time of 1969 through 1984.
Somewhere.
Do you recall being shown this document during the course of the divorce trial,
No,
summarizing the income?
no.
Did you put your income on income tax reports?
I had nothing to do with income taxes. If Dan did put something of mine on there, then Dan did it. But I didn't file separate income tax.
Why don't you
We had
take
an
a look at,
account-
why don't you take a look at those figures and tell me if you think that those are accurate figures regarding income?
Dan made this list up, right?
This was a list that was introduced into evidence, and I'd just like you to tell me whether you think that they're accurate or not.
I wouldn't have any way of knowing.
I had no way of knowing how much money you made.
Well, I think my teaching job was $7,000 a year. So he's got down here in 69, I made 6,200. So that's close. In 1970, Gordon Taylor,
If you, ma'am, if you could just read them to yourself and let me know if you think they're accurate.
I don't know how he ever could have. I have no idea. I don't know how he ever came to a figure on what I made babysitting because I never kept records.
Okay.
But in the beginning, it looks okay.
You have described your marriage to lots of different people over the course of the years, right?
During the course of what years?
During the course of,
My life?
yes, during the course of your
No.
life, during the course of, after your separation, you've made lots of statements to different people
Yes,
about
after the separation.
your marriage.
Right.
And you have, for example, told people, like Mr. Hargraves, who was representing you, that your marriage to Dan was the most ideal marriage of any couple. You were very happy with Dan. Did you make that statement to Mr. Hargraves?
At times, yes, I believe that.
and you told Dr. Goldspan that we had a wonderful marriage. Is that it?
I thought so. I thought we did.
You told Dr. Robinson we had an ideal marriage until Linda came along?
Yes, probably. Dr. Robinson, I don't even remember meeting him though.
Okay. Did you tell Dr. DeFrancesca that you were always happy and that you had a happy marriage until Linda came along?
Right. I would have said that probably.
Well, when was it? I'm a little confused. When was it that you started describing your marriage as being rotten from the beginning?
When, exactly at the time you're on. When we separated, I then withdrew my consent for Dan Broderick being in control of everything. Until that point, I totally consented in our marriage to our agreement that he was in charge of everything. And when he walked,
Excuse me, wait a minute. Maybe perhaps you misunderstood my question. When you talked to Dr. Goldspan, for example, that was in 1990. That was after you killed Dan and Linda Broderick. And when he asked you to describe the marriage, you described it as a wonderful marriage, right?
I thought it was. It was a very unequally structured marriage, but I went along with it. And I was happy when it was like that.
Well, how is it that you at other times described to other people that the marriage was a disaster from day one?
Dan was a control freak, and he had control in this marriage. As long as I didn't fight it, it was okay with me.
Okay, but if we're talking about after separation, let's say you've already separated. You already know now what you think about the marriage. When you talk to Dr. Goldspan, when you talk to Mr. Hargraves during the divorce, when you talk to Dr. DeFrancesca, when you talk to Dr. Robinson, you describe your marriage as being a wonderful, ideal marriage.
As long as it worked, it was. As long as I went along with this ridiculous plan that I was in, it worked. It wasn't fair.
You didn't qualify that at all when you talked to these people. You said it was a wonderful, ideal marriage until Linda came along.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this argument.
That's right. So
Sustained.
Okay. Didn't you also write in your book that the marriage was a disaster from day one?
looking back from the vantage point of where I wrote the book in 1988, and I think I've already testified to that on the ski trip when I was suicidal and depressed. I wrote that book as a memoir in case I killed myself, so my children would know what happened. And I was very angry at that point that it's 88. I still have no settlement. I've been put through everything. And
Wasn't it 1986 when you talked to Bill Hargraves, when you were going through the divorce, when you were angry about things, when you still told him you had the most ideal marriage of any couple?
Your Honor,
But that was-
object is argumentative, and if she can allow her to finish her previous answer before she has another question.
Overruled and argumentative, it's asked and answered, stand on that grounds. Go ahead.
Was it 1986 when you made that statement to Mr. Hargraves?
yes, but that fits together because in 1986, I still hadn't despaired in the legal system and in everything else as I did by the point of 88.
So your anger at Dan Broderick after the separation is what made you change your feelings about whether or not you'd had a good marriage before the separation, correct?
Right.
It is true that you had discussed divorce on many occasions with Dan Broderick during the course of your marriage.
I don't know. No, we didn't discuss divorce.
You threatened divorce on many occasions.
The same way I've been said to have threatened to kill him. Yes.
Well, you didn't just threaten to kill him, you did kill him.
Well, and we did get a divorce.
Yes. And you threatened divorce even in the first year of your marriage, didn't you?
And probably to kill him in the first year of my marriage, too. Yes.
You threatened to leave him when he was in law school, correct?
When Dan beat up Kim and I left and went to New York, yes, I was going to leave him.
Was there anybody else around when Dan allegedly beat up Kim, Mrs. Broderick?
No.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this argumentative.
Overruled, that's a proper question. Answer stands.
And so now you're saying that Dan beat up Kim, that you left him, but you still had a wonderful marriage.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this argumentative.
Sustained.
It is fair to say you would even have to admit yourself in fairness that Dan Broderick's description of your marriage and your relationship and whether or not you were happy was significantly different than your description, wasn't it?
When was Dan describing it? After the affair and after the separation and into the divorce? Or are you talking that he was describing it as it was happening when we were both happy?
Hasn't Dan described that you were never happy with him, that you were always volatile, that he felt emotional problems from the very beginning?
That's what he was telling me.
As to that question.
No real gangster stance.
He has described that, correct?
In the same
The
way
answer
I
is-
was writing the book in 88, he was telling people in 88 and 89, he was trying to rationalize why we'd gotten divorced and he had the affair. And that's how he would explain things, yes.
Well, he described, you
never
got very
earlier.
angry at him at the divorce trial because he tried to describe his feelings about the marriage and how it had been very difficult from the very beginning and how he was never able to make you happy and how he felt that your temper was out of control and that you had had emotional problems from the beginning, that you had both tried to keep it together because of your Catholic background, because of the children that you had from the beginning.
He was making all of that up from the vantage point that he wanted it to appear that way in 1989.
So you're saying he was making all that up from his vantage point, but you're not making any of this up from your vantage point.
No,
Is that
I'm
what you're
not saying that. I'm saying my vantage point changed drastically over the years as to who I was talking to, as to what I was feeling at the time, and what I was talking about in the marriage.
Well, it is true, you are aware that there are other people who also believe that you had significant emotional problems from very early on in the marriage.
I was never aware of anyone thinking that, no.
You've
Never.
interviewed with Dr. DeFrancesca. You've heard Dr. DeFrancesca testify that you had a borderline personality, low frustration tolerance, unstable moods, intense anger, manipulation.
But I didn't meet
I'm gonna
her.
object as to what time that was. That's
Sustain, rephrase it.
Well, didn't Dr. DeFrancesca testify that personality was something that you'd had all throughout your adulthood?
Your Honor, I'll object to that. That assumes facts not in evidence.
Well, she asked if she recalled her testifying after the last trial. Do you recall her saying that, just yes or no?
I don't specifically recall her saying that I've had those things through my whole life because she didn't ask me about my whole life. I didn't meet her until before the first trial in jail, so.
You described to Jeanette DeWise, who works for the Reader and had an extensive interview with you, that you were very resentful of Dan from the very beginning. Correct? You were resentful that you had to essentially, you felt, be his maid. You remember saying that?
I know that he expected me to be his maid from day one, yes.
You described to her that before you'd been married, you had country clubs, you had cars, you had lots of clothes and designer things. I had a maid when I was growing up. My laundry got magically done. I don't remember who did it, but I know I didn't. And here I get married to this doctor, and all of a sudden I'm turned into his maid. You
That's
were angry about that.
I wasn't angry. It was just a kind of a shocking switch in time that the day I married Dan Broderick, he expected me to do his laundry and iron his sheets and make his bed, and it was a real drastic switch for me.
He couldn't afford to pay for a maid at the time, right?
No, that's not it at all. He used to do it all himself the day before I married him, or someone did it for him the day before I married him. It was just such a drastic thing that the day I married him, I was now the maid.
Well, when you testified last time, this is why I'm a little bit confused. When you testified last time, you said, I was happy to be married. I wanted to be married all my life. I was looking forward to cooking, fixing up the house, cleaning, having children. That was something that you were looking forward to doing.
That's right.
And yet when you got married and that was something that you ended up doing, it was something that you immediately resented.
It was just Dan acted like he was a paraplegic from the day one, like he couldn't any longer function in these regards because he had a wife now. It was just funny that he was able to function on his own before, and now that he had a wife, I would take care of all these things for him. I didn't hate him for it. I didn't, resent him for it. It was just kind of funny that all of a sudden he couldn't do these things anymore and couldn't even help me do them. It was woman's work now. Before we were married, he could do it, and it wasn't woman's work.
You indicated that because he took care of all of the financial matters, that you just knew nothing about the finances or any financial matters, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Well, somewhere along the line, you obviously became very knowledgeable about finances, long before separation.
I know you want to think that, but that is not true.
Well, do you recall having discussions, for example, with Jim Milliken in 1983, when you were all on your European trip, and him being amazed at the knowledge that you had about financial matters?
If they're referring to the investment club I was in, which I imagine he is referring to the investment club I was in, a group of women, and we'd pool our money. It was $20 a month. We'd pool our money, and we'd talk about stocks, and we'd invest in stocks. That's the only kind of money thing I did. And even with the investment club, I never kept the books or made the actual transactions. I was only part of the social get-together that discussed the stocks and wrote the checks.
And you were
But
very
I-
knowledgeable about stocks and financial matters. In fact, the other people in the group listened to you, basically, because you knew what was going on.
Well,
Isn't that
that's
true?
funny, because, I mean, all I knew is this once a month meeting with a bunch of housewives, and we talked about stocks, and that's the extent of it. We had a few little speakers and stuff. The other people probably knew absolutely nothing, because that's the only way they would have thought I knew anything.
Didn't you consider after separation becoming a stockbroker and try to get a job with Dean Witter? And when they wouldn't hire you, you were upset because you, or when they offered to hire you, you were upset because you didn't want to go through a training program.
If you could find Dean Witter that said anywhere that they were going to hire me, I'd take the job in a minute. None of that is true.
Okay?
I
Did
never
you
went to
describe
Dean
that?
Witter.
Did
They
you-
never offered me a job. I don't have the qualifications for a job. And whoever told you that, I don't know where they got it from. It
Did
never
you-
happened.
Did you describe it at all to Liz Armstrong?
No, it never happened. Nothing even, sometimes people get confused and there's a thread of truth and I can put it together where, oh, they were confused. Nothing like that ever happened, except years earlier before the split up, I went to an interview at Merrill Lynch, and the man was very rude to me and said that it was a job for men and that I had children and that I should basically go home and take care of my children. And I figured if I wanted to, I could have sued him. He was so rude. But I never took a test. They never offered me a job. Nothing ever came of it.
Just so that it's clear, you're indicating that you never had a conversation with Liz Armstrong about applying for a job with Dean Witter, and that you never got the job because you refused to go through the training program and refused to work on a commission basis? Never had that discussion with Liz Armstrong?
I read that Liz Armstrong said those things. Those things never happened, not even close. Nothing even like it ever happened. I'm telling you, if they had offered me a job, I would have taken it.
One of the other things that you said during the course of your testimony was that after the separation, that Coral Reef was the only asset that had your name on it. And that's one of the reasons why you were so upset that it got sold. It was the only asset that had your name on it. You were aware of the fact that you had your name on, for example, the Warner Springs condo. You were aware of that, weren't you?
I'm not sure that I was aware that my name was on that, but
Well, you knew of that
I ended-
asset. You knew
that
of
is not an
the,
asset, though. That was not an asset at the time, and it's not an asset now.
well, an asset is worth some money, right? Are you saying Warner Springs was worth no money?
When we had it for all the years, we were one of the very first investors,
Excuse
and
me,
it was unsaleable. Yes, at any price.
after the
and still is.
separation?
Yes.
You were aware of the Fairbanks Ranch lots, and you knew that your name was on those lots, and those were definitely an asset.
The Fairbanks Ranch lot that had my name on it was sold before the separation, I believe. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But the other Fairbanks Ranch lot was owned by the pension fund of Dan's Law Corporation, and it did not have my name on it.
What about Pioneer Park? You knew about Pioneer Park.
No, I didn't know about Pioneer Park.
You knew nothing about that investment with Helen Picard and her
No.
husband?
No, I didn't.
What about the Keystone condo? You knew
It
about
didn't
that.
have my name on it.
The Keystone condo didn't have your name on it?
No, it wasn't. It didn't even actually have Dan's name on it. It
Well,
was
you
all-
knew that it was a community asset. You knew that you
But
had
that's
bought
totally
that.
different. Yes, I knew that everything we owned, in theory, was a community asset. But insofar as having my name on it and knowing how much it was worth, or having any paperwork, or being able to sell it or know how much it was worth, none of those things had my name on it. And even if
Whether or not they had your name on it, you knew that they were community assets. You knew that Coral Reef was not the only community asset that was being sold, correct?
Coral Reef was a only community asset that I knew about that was worth money, because we had 10 years worth of equity, and that I could see and I knew about that had my name on it legit. Other things that had my name on them, I had no paperwork for, and perhaps I put my name on them as a formality. But insofar as knowing where the paperwork was or who owned it or who bought it, no, I had no participation in any other purchases.
And you've also testified that you knew nothing about any of the investments that Dan Broderick made with his brother Larry.
At which time are you saying I knew nothing? At
Right.
separation?
You testified at separation.
At separation, I didn't know about those things.
You knew that you had your name on the Coyotes Yellow House.
Yes, but I also knew it had no equity.
Well, it had $143,000 worth of equity in it.
But that's not really equity when you're talking.
$143,000 doesn't sound like equity?
I don't think so. If you consider 6% real estate, whatever, to sell it. And when you buy a new house and the down payment isn't really enough equity, so that if you sold the house and went through the taxes and the fees and the points and whatever you do, you wouldn't have ended up with any money out of that house.
It is true that since the separation, you have variously described Dan in pretty derogatory terms with respect to how he was when you met him, correct?
Yes.
You described him, for example, as being a pathetic bumpkin.
I thought he looked like a nerd in the wedding picture now. But then he thought he was sharp looking. And I obviously did too. I married him.
After the separation, did you describe him, though, as being a pathetic bumpkin and a nerd and having no social awareness, and that you were the one that gave that all to him?
I said all kinds of ugly things every chance I got. Yes.
And during the marriage, before you separated, you said some ugly things about him in front of other people, too. You called him a fag. You called him an asshole. You made derogatory comments about him in front of other people, didn't you?
The Broderick family calls everybody
Excuse me.
fags all the time.
Mrs. Broderick, did you call him a fag in front of other people at parties and social functions?
Probably, and I probably called him an asshole. Sure.
Wasn't it your testimony that you never used bad language till after the separation?
I used shit and damn and stuff, but not around the kids.
An asshole?
An asshole, but I didn't consider that bad language in the text that I was using and stuff.
And you
I
didn't
didn't-
consider it hurtful at all to say things like that or to put him down in front of other people?
It depends on where we are and who we're with and what he's doing.
Well,
I mean,
for
sometimes he
example,
was doing things and it was just funny.
For example, when you went to Lake Tahoe with the Fords and a couple other groups of people, you recall that one of the couples there basically felt extremely uncomfortable because you were constantly putting Dan down and saying uncomfortable things and making them feel uncomfortable.
Now, what year would that have been?
1981.
I know that you interviewed someone who in 1989 or 90 or 91 said something like that, but I never knew back then. She's referring to the same weekend Brian Forbes mentioned. And Brian Forbes mentioned it in the context of what a hard worker Dan was. We went away on this weekend with tennis and swimming and boats, and Dan brought legal files this high, and he sat there with a highlighter pen while everyone else was playing tennis and having fun. He was working on the weekend. And so I was annoyed with him for either, do one or the other, but I wished he hadn't have brought all that work with him on the weekend.
Well, you were obviously annoyed enough that you were making other people feel uncomfortable and making comments to the effect that they didn't think your marriage would last the year.
She made that in 1991.
Facts, not in evidence, in this argument.
Were you aware of the fact that she made that comment to Gail Forbes back then in 1981?
How would I know? No.
It is true that when you had disagreements or complaints that you didn't have any problems sharing those complaints with Dan Broderick.
About what, when?
If you got angry, for example, you didn't have any problems throwing a ketchup bottle at him.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Did you throw a
That was-
ketchup bottle at him?
That was not even an argument. Neither one of us were arguing with each other at that time. Kim was not there. None of the children were there. Dan came home from work. Want to tell you the little story? Dan came home from work. He's sitting at the dining room table and he's teasing me. And I'm like, cut it out, cut it out, cut it out. You probably called him an asshole way back then. Cut it out. I'm really tired. Please cut it out. And he wouldn't cut it out. And he was joking with me. He was teasing me. I said, if you don't cut it out, I'm going to throw this at you. And then he went, whatever he was teasing me about, he did it again on purpose. I threw it at him and he ducked. And it was funny. And it didn't break and it didn't do any damage. And Dan and I told that story on ourselves to other people. I mean,
And Kim,
we told how funny it was.
Kim wasn't there and wasn't upset about it. The fact that the ketchup splattered all over the wall.
That's not true. No. I wish Dan was here to tell you the truth.
So do I.
So do I.
That might be a good place to take the afternoon recess, ladies and gentlemen.
Your Honor, and I'm going to ask that she be admonished in front of the jury. If she wants to argue her case now, Your Honor.
She's not arguing, Mr. Early. Take a recess. Will 10 minutes give you folks enough? We've got a late start. We'll be in recess till 25 minutes after 3.
And I'll ask for the rest of my witnesses that she not glare at them when they're on the stand.
We're in recess, ladies and gentlemen. Please remember that Mr. Early, knock it off. We're in recess till 3:25, ladies and gentlemen. Remember the admonition.
You seen it come to order, this court is again in session.
Matter of the people of the state of California versus Elizabeth Broderick. Court finds all members of the jury panel are present, all counsel are present. Ms. Broderick is present. You may proceed, Ms. Wells.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Broderick, you described during the course of your marriage your pregnancies. You indicated that you had 9 pregnancies, correct?
Yes.
Some of those pregnancies were terminated on your part by way of a voluntary abortion, correct?
Yes.
Your Honor, there was an objection before trial that she said I can't.
Your Honor, excuse me.
I'd like to be heard on this.
Both of you approach the bench.
You described in 1978, Dan Broderick deciding to leave the firm of Gray Carey and go out on his own. And it is correct that was something, he didn't just do that unilaterally, basically tell you, I don't care whether we have any security or not, I'm going to do this on my own. That was something that you had urged him to do, correct?
It's even discussed in the marriage encounters in 76 that that's our plan as a couple together, that we will do that. Yes.
Okay, so, and that was something that he had uncertain feelings about. That was something that you pushed him into doing. He wasn't really sure whether he wanted to do it, and that was something that you encouraged and you pushed, correct?
Well, he was sure he wanted to do it, but it was a very scary move. It was a very scary move, and he was looking for reassurance that yes, I'm in it with you, and yes, we're going to do it, and yes, I was in it with him, and we were going to do it, but it was very scary, and we discussed that in writing in 1976 in both marriage encounters.
Okay,
But that was a year and a half before he actually did it. How it would be risky, and
it wasn't something where he was just by himself putting the family at risk. It was something that you had encouraged and pushed him to do.
I don't know that I definitely encouraged and definitely supported him, but I've already explained that Gray Carey was not meeting his professional needs.
Right, and I know you've explained that.
Right.
Do you recall explaining in your book that you pushed him, and after much hemming and hawing, he did it?
Again, it's
Did you say
back
that?
to the book that was written in '88 when I was angry and suicidal. The real, you could have said I pushed him, but the real word is I wholeheartedly supported him and said, yes, I'm behind you 150%. Even if we lose the house, we can do this, because it was scary.
So I guess you
I
are
guess
acknowledging.
you could say I pushed him, and you could say that I supported him 150% if that's pushing, but
Are you acknowledging then that in 1988 anyway, that you said that you pushed him into doing it?
In the book, if that's what it says in the book, yes, that's what I wrote in the book.
And he went and picked out, once he decided to do it, he went and picked out some very simple furniture to decorate his office, and you were the one that encouraged and pushed him to buy the very expensive furniture so that his office would look bright.
Right. And I wanted to say if we were going to do it, we were going to do it right, and that's exactly the time I went and got this resale license. I described earlier, because I got the furniture for his office half price with that resale license. But yes, he had the finest looking office in town and he had no clients. And that was my insistence.
And the family did not suffer any detriment by him doing that. He was immediately successful, correct?
He was very shortly thereafter successful, but because of the way the cases go, he didn't have a paycheck in the first, year or so, or a year and a half, or because of the nature of his cases. He didn't have people pay him by the hour, ever.
He did have an income, though. He was bringing home money in 1979. Like we've talked about, he was making $82,000 that year, correct?
I wouldn't know that. All I knew is we had a $500,000 line of credit at a bank, and that's what we were living on. That's what I knew.
The family didn't suffer any detriment by that. Is that correct? You didn't have to move out of your house. You didn't have to sell any furniture. You didn't have to go live in an apartment. In fact, in 1979, that was the year that you were able to put a pool in the backyard, correct?
We didn't suffer any detriment, but we were kind of put back to square one because of the $500,000 line of credit. We were living on loans, and the pool was all done on loans.
Okay. She obviously had some discretionary money in order to put a pool in. Is that fair to say?
I wouldn't know that. Dan made those decisions. Dan got some kind of a mortgage. I knew nothing about that, but yes, it would certainly appear so if you put a swimming pool in.
If you knew nothing about it, how do you know that he financed it by way of a mortgage?
The swimming pool?
Yes.
Because I think at the time of the swimming pool, he refinanced the whole house or something and got a whole new mortgage that included money for the swimming pool.
Well, how is it that you knew that if you knew nothing about the finances?
Because I would pick up, in passing, things like that.
When you separated in 1985, February of 1985, you were living in the rental at Avenue de las Andes, correct?
Yes.
And that was a very nice, beautiful
Yes.
big 5-bedroom home.
At one point, Dan and I were thinking of buying it, but they wouldn't sell it. It was lovely. Yes.
And at that point, when you separated, you had been married 15 years. 15 years, 10 months, correct?
Fine. Yes.
You were 37 years old?
Yeah, I guess. I'll take your word for it.
Well, you don't need to take my word for
Well-
it. How old were you in 1985 when you separated?
38. Well, I wouldn't have had my 85 birthday, so I was 37. See, I believed you.
And this photograph that's already been, maybe it hasn't been marked. May I have a photograph marked as People's Exhibit 68? I have another one that's been marked 67, and I'll identify in just a moment.
All right. 68, described for the record.
An 8x10 photograph,
Of the defendant.
yes.
Somewhere.
This photograph that's been marked People's Exhibit 68, this is a photograph of you, and it was a photograph that was taken in 1985, correct?
Yes, it says it in the corner.
And you had indicated that somewhere along the line, in order to please Dan Broderick, you had grown your hair down real long.
Yes.
Your hair's not long here.
That was 1983 on our trip to New York when I was doing the wrinkle stuff. That was 1983 because of the affair.
And how long had you grown your hair in 1985?
I can get you a picture of it, right down to where it was in college.
Okay, and then you cut it again in 84 or 85?
I don't remember, but yeah. On the trip to New York, I had long hair.
May I have marked as People's Exhibit 67, a poster board with a photograph of Elizabeth Broderick,
Somewhere.
showing you what's been marked as People's 67. Do you recognize that photograph?
Yes.
And when was that?
I've never seen it before, but I recognize myself.
Was that taken in December of 1985?
I don't know. I know it's Gail Forbes' living room because of the map.
Okay. And it was taken before a New Year's Eve party in December of 1985. Does that sound fair?
It was a New Year's Eve. So if you've got that year, must be it.
So this was almost a year after you had been separated. You separated in February of 85, and this was almost a year after that, correct?
Yes. I did. I'm not really sure that that's that New Year's Eve. It could have been the next one. I'm not sure.
So you're indicating it could have been New Year's Eve of 1986. Is that what you're indicating?
Yes, it could have been.
Dan Broderick moved into Coral Reef, you've indicated that the Coral Reef house was under construction, and he was simply living there in a sleeping bag or whatever, correct?
Yes,
As
the
far as you
construction
know.
was the ground floor, the bedrooms were untouched.
And at that time, around the time of separation, excuse me, strike that, let me back up. Several months before you separated, before Dan Broderick moved to Coral Reef, you had actually left for a period of several days, just left the house, essentially disappeared as far as the family was concerned, and were gone for several days, right?
No.
You don't recall at any time leaving and going and staying at Vacation Village and staying away from the house for several days?
I don't really remember that, no.
Do you recall going over to Gail Ford's house afterwards and telling her that you had just left and you'd been staying at Vacation Village and living out of your car?
Unless she's talking about the time, I don't know. I don't remember Vacation Village, but I know I was homeless for a little while there in June, where I would have had to look for a hotel, but
Prior to separation, several months before February of 1985, you left the house and you were gone for several days.
no,
In fact, Kim described you being gone for several days, just disappearing, and the kids didn't know where you were at the time that you moved into the house, which would have been September of 84.
no,
That never occurred.
no,
Did you ever go over to Gail Ford's house and tell her that that occurred?
no. At the time that we moved, Dan and I had a fight the day that we moved because we had lived in our house for 10 years. He put his personal belongings in the red Corvette.
Excuse me, I know, Ms. Broderick, you've described that you had a fight, but isn't it true that when you left for several days?
No,
You're not aware, you don't recall going over to Gail Ford's house and her going down to Dan's house to check on him and the
I
kids?
read that in her thing, but I don't remember that.
Okay, so Gail. Do you remember when you did separate, having a conversation with Gail Forbes where you told her that life would be easier if you just killed Dan or if Dan was dead?
No,
Did you ever make such a statement to Gail Forbes?
no, but I can tell you what she might be thinking of.
Did you ever make such a statement to her about the time of your separation in February of 1985?
No, not that statement, but
Did you ever say anything to her about life would be easier if you just killed Dan or if he was dead?
no, but do you want me to go on a little bit?
Not
No.
particularly.
Okay, no.
And I don't mean to be rude by cutting you off, but council can ask questions on redirect if there's something else that he'd like to bring up.
Okay, fine.
In June of 85, you moved to the house on Calle de Cielo, and that house did cost $650,000. The property cost $650,000,
I
correct?
believe so, yes.
And at that time, Dan and all four of the children, by that time, were all living at the Coral Reef house, correct?
Yes. And I
Now,
was there every day.
when you moved to Calle de Cielo, you indicated that Maria Montez continued to be your maid, correct?
Calle del Cielo, yes.
Yes, okay. You continued, you had a gardener, you had a pool man, you had people helping you taking care of the house while you lived there at Calle de Cielo.
Right, you had to. There's no way I could have done it.
Between 1985 and 1989, you were able to put at least $200,000 into that house, into refurbishing it and fixing it up,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
And you've described redecorating the kitchen and putting in a pool house and carpeting the house and furnishing the house.
Right.
Now, you described that you fixed up the house in 1989 when you were getting ready to sell it. It is true, though, that the house was nice well before that. Several years before that, it was definitely furnished and carpeted and in a living condition.
It was a definite, very slow progression. It was a mess outdoors, All the landscaping front and back was a jungle. It was horrible. So it was a very, very slow process, indoors and out. I mean,
As-
every spec of every room and every floor and every door. So it was a very constant but slow process.
As of 1986, you described the house that you lived in, though, as being a big, beautiful house.
I mean, relatively speaking, it was a dream home
Okay.
because of the location. It was an absolute piece of heaven, what you could see from that house without even moving. The whole back of the house, unobstructed, white water, ocean view, sunsets. It was beautiful, the view.
My question is, in 1986, did you describe living in a big, beautiful home with 2 great cars, having many friends?
Yeah, in 86, yes.
So as far as you were concerned, in 1986, you were living in a big, beautiful home.
I was very happy in that spot. And relative to the rest of the world, the $650,000 ocean view home in La Jolla is a beautiful home. It happened to have been very dirty and very messed up and cracked doors, but I could have fixed that. And I did fix that, some of it.
So that wasn't something then you're indicating that caused you too much emotional distress?
That the house was a wreck?
Yes.
When I lived there in the beginning with nothing, when I was, and I hope I've testified clearly to this, when I spent that summer there still expecting to knock the whole house down, I didn't move anything in and I didn't purchase any appliances or anything because I still thought we were knocking that house down in September. So that was very upsetting and disconcerting to me to live in a house in those conditions. I think I got a coffee machine.
Okay, but those conditions were taken care of by 1986. By 1986, you knew that you were going to be in that house. You knew that you had furniture. And you were living in a big, beautiful home.
I never knew. I had some furniture because Dan told me to get it out December of 85, just before he moved. The day he moved, he brought the truck over and he gave me some furniture. But it wasn't living room furniture that I bought later. And it was bits and pieces. It was a very long process.
Right, and you're the way that you're talking about it to me suggests that you didn't feel tremendously upset about that. You knew that it was a long process and you were going to fix things up, and you were fixing things up.
Well, the thing is, I wasn't secure in that home, and as I fixed things up, I didn't mind buying furniture and towels and beds and that kind of stuff that could come with me. But when I invested in the building of that house, I was afraid I'd lose my money forever if Dan sold the house, or in the divorce I didn't get the house or something. So I was really torn about repairing the building of the house.
Mrs. Broderick, from the time that you moved into the house in 1985 all the way through to November of 1989, did Dan Broderick ever do anything to suggest that he was going to sell that house?
No, except the ELISA and the forced sale of Coral Reef.
We're talking about Coral Reef. Now I'm talking about
Right.
Calle de Cielo. Once you moved into Calle de Cielo, you knew that was your house to live in. He never did. Did he ever do anything to suggest he was going to sell that house?
No, but all I got was a phone call after the other house was sold. So how would I know he wouldn't do the same thing with this house? And I'd get some phone call or a 4-hour notice that my house was gone.
Are you saying you didn't have any idea that Coral Reef was being sold but for that 4-hour notice?
Right, at that time, I didn't know. I knew there were discussions.
We'll talk about that in just a minute. Just so that it's clear, there was never any action by Dan Broderick to do anything to sell your Calle de Cielo house, correct?
Correct, but there was also no action to take his name off it either.
Okay, and there was a reason for that. The bank wouldn't let him take his name off. He was the one that
He didn't
was.
try. He didn't
Yes, he
try
did.
to take his name off.
Well, isn't it true that Dan Broderick was the one who had the income? Obviously, the bank was not going to allow him to take his name off that mortgage when you had no source of income.
I don't know that.
That's not a correct.
I don't know
statement
that.
to begin with.
Well, it's argumentative, sustained.
Do you recall him testifying at the divorce trial that he attempted to take his name off and they wouldn't let him because of the loan?
No, because
he
that's
was the
not true.
security-
He never attempted to take his name off.
Okay. All during that time, you had your name on the property too, correct?
Yes,
And as of January of 1989, when the divorce became final, that property became your sole separate property, correct?
correct.
There was no doubt in your mind about that at the time.
Right.
Now, when Dan Broderick moved into Cyprus, the bulk of the furniture that had been at the Coral Reef house went to you. And he moved into Cyprus with just a fairly small amount of furniture, correct?
No, the bulk of it didn't go to me at all. The bulk of it went with him, but then he bought all new furniture.
But did you see the shape of his house when he first moved into it at Cyprus?
No,
You never went into the house at Cyprus when he moved in 1985?
no, not really. I know it was old, but I didn't ever, no.
You just marked one picture, People's Exhibit 69. Which is a 5x7, 4x6, excuse me, photograph of the living room.
People 69.
I see the picture.
If you just take a look at this picture, and if you can, and you indicate, does that look like the Cypress house and the condition of the living room when Dan and the children moved in?
I wouldn't know, but I recognize my love seat, my sofa, my table set, the lamp, and our family's large screen TV there.
And you described that, with respect to the furniture, that you got a threatening letter from Dan about taking the furniture or else he was gonna sell it? Something to that effect?
Yes, I think that's what it said. I think it said, get your junk out of the garage.
May I have marked as People's Exhibit 70?
70?
One-page letter dated November 26, 1985. If you take a look at People 70, do you recognize that letter as the one that Dan Broderick sent to you regarding the furniture?
Not particularly, can I read it real quick?
Sure, you can read it.
Okay.
Is that the letter he sent to you regarding the furniture?
Mhm.
All right. In this letter, he indicates to you, I understand there are several pieces of furniture at Coral Reef that you would like moved to your house on Calle de Cielo. I will arrange for this as soon as you provide me a list of what you want. I am well aware that you want the desk, armoire.
I'm going to object to reading the letter.
I'll ask some questions.
Sustained. Ask questions about it.
There's a list of property here that he said you were well aware of that you wanted. The desk, the armoire, the love seats, but I'm not sure about the piano, the living room couch, the dining room set, the pewter flatware, the red easy chair and stool, the pink swivel chairs, the antique love seat, the coffee tables, the sofa table, the end tables, the table lamps, the cibis, the corner cabinet.
Your Honor, I'm still going to object, Your Honor. She's reading the letter.
Sustained. Best evidence.
Did you let him know which of these pieces of property that you wanted?
See, we never had a discussion over what I wanted and what I didn't want.
What he's indicating here is that he wanted
I
a
wanted
list from
this sofa and
you.
it ended up at Cyprus, so I don't know how that happened.
Well, did you get the desk and the armoire and the love seats and the dining room set? Didn't you get those pieces of furniture?
Those are exactly the furniture that I got, yes.
And you got the pewter flatware, and the red easy chair, and the pink swivel chairs, and the antique love seat, and the
No.
sofa table, the table
No,
lamp.
this is the antique love seat right here. I didn't get it.
Okay. Did you ask for it?
I don't remember. I don't remember.
How about the cibis?
No, I think we kind of split that. He ended up with some of it and I ended up with some of it. Those are just little statues anyway. Those aren't furniture. But it's the last sentence in the second paragraph that says, and if you don't tell me what you want or something, I intend to get rid of it or sell it or something. And I found that to be a threatening sentence.
The movers will be moving me from Coral Reef to Cyprus on January 3rd, so you have until then to let me know. Anything you don't indicate you want brought to Calle de Cielo, I intend to take with me or sell.
Right.
You thought that that was a threat.
Yes, I did.
Was that an attack? You described that when you got letters from Dan Broderick that he was attacking you. Did you consider this to be an attack?
I said when I got legal papers from Dan Broderick.
Okay. And my question to you was, did you consider this letter to be an attack?
No, but I considered it controlling and threatening.
It is true that there was a period of time when you did not want the furniture in your house because you were
Yes.
fixing it up.
Because we were knocking it down.
Do you recall writing in your diary, I didn't want to move any furniture here because the work could be much more easily and quickly done in the empty house?
That's right.
You're not talking about knocking down a house, you're talking about putting in carpet.
Well, what's the date of that?
Well, obviously it's sometime before you got your furniture.
Well, it's probably in the summer that I didn't want to move any furniture in because why? There was going to be extensive work, if not cut. One of our neighbors cut the house in half and carried it away. I didn't know if Don Edson would even want that house literally carted away. But certainly I didn't want any furniture in a house that was going to be totally redone.
Okay. So it wasn't that you were being deprived of furniture anyway, it was that you had made the decision that you didn't want the furniture there.
For a
correct?
certain amount of time, but that's in the summer. That letter's December 85, correct?
November 85.
Yeah. And there's another thing here is that we only had one set of furniture. And when Dan was moving to his house,
Yes, I know, you explained that.
well, I didn't want to take all the furniture, then what would they use?
Now, you have said on occasion since the time of separation that when Dan left you, he left you penniless and homeless and destitute, correct?
I didn't have any money. And I felt I was thrown out of the rental.
And so you've indicated that you felt you were left homeless and penniless and destitute?
I felt that way, yes. And I felt I was forced out of Coral Reef as well.
Before you had your motion for support, when you hired Mr. Hargraves, you filed a summary of your expenses in 1986, correct?
Mr. Hargraves did that.
And that was based on your expenses. You gave him all of your checks and he went through all of the checks and he marked the date and he marked the check number and he marked the amount and what you had spent them on, correct?
Absolutely not, no. If you have something like that, it would have come later. Mr. Hargraves did not use any of my figures to come up with his inflated expense thing that he filed at that time.
May I have marked, Your Honor, as People's Exhibit 71?
71. You
What
get
is
started
entitled Respondent's Summary of 1986 Expenses?
somewhere.
Showing you People's 71. Is that a summary of your expenses for 1986?
This is a Tricia Smith thing, no? It says Harvey's name. Okay, but it's in 287. Okay, now what's the question?
The question is that a summary of your 1986 expenses?
Yes, but this was done after the December 30th court hearing.
Okay, so you're just indicating this was filed after the hearing, but this is an accurate reflection of your 1986 expenses, correct?
I don't know. You know.
Well, there are,
If he did ask for copies of my checkbook register, and then one of his secretaries put that together. I never used that. Hargreaves was a goner by that time.
okay.
I never
Did he make
referred
a
to that.
summary of your expenses based on your checks? Are these, here are your check numbers, check date, and what you wrote the check to, and what the amount was?
Yes.
And the total expenses, the money spent by you in 1986 was $220,000.
Well, see, that's, I don't know where I would have gotten it from. Okay, you're adding in the mortgage payments on the Del Cielo house. I never would have received that money. Dan kept that money out.
Okay, was the total, obviously that was a payment that was being made for you, correct?
A lot of those things were payments that Dan made for me, right? So see that it doesn't add up like that.
Isn't the total expense, are you saying the total expenses of $220,000 is not correct?
I don't know if it is.
Okay, well, if you want to take the time to look,
Okay,
add it up.
okay, let me first see what this is. Okay, he would have said that it cost that much to keep me in that house that year. But I didn't pay these bills, and I never had this money. A lot
Did
of
the
it,
check-
some of it I did.
The checks came from your check register. That's where he got the checks and the check number. Obviously, you had made those payments. Isn't that correct?
I don't know if that's correct. I know he asked for my checkbook thing to make something, but I don't know if he used it for this. What I'm having a problem with is at what point Dan stopped taking the money out of a check he was giving me.
Mrs. Broderick, we're not talking about that. We're talking about how much money you spent in 1986 based on the checks that you wrote. And if you want to dispute that, that's fine. I'm asking you to take a look at that. And if we can, if you need to take some time to look at it, we can do that.
Your Honor, and I'm going to object as asked to the answer. She's already explained that she wasn't writing mortgage checks.
Well, the district attorney's inferring that there's some mortgage checks in there. I don't know. She can take time to look at it and give an answer.
Okay, can we discuss this a little?
Well, let's not talk about the mortgage checks. We'll take the
Okay, let's
mortgages
talk about the
out.
master plan on that page there. Right here.
Excuse me just a minute. It shows, for example, checks that were paid for your telephone bill, your gas and electric, your water, your pool service, your gardener, your food, your maid.
No, it doesn't say that. Look, this column says average monthly cost, and he somehow got an average, and then he would have times that figure by 12 to come up with that figure. This is not actual expenditures that I'm aware of, unless it's in there somewhere.
Okay, well, let's look at pool service, number 19. Doesn't it give a check? The date that it was written, January 6th,
Right.
and the total amount.
Right.
There's a total down at the bottom for all of those payments you made that year for the pool service. The total is $936. At the front where he makes a summary, he puts the exact amount of $936 that you paid for pool service. Now, he goes through and does that based on your checks for every one of these and ends up with this total.
Are you
correct?
sure? Are you sure? Because
If
I'm
you would
not
like-
sure.
If you would like to look at this and
If you're
challenge it.
sure, I'll believe it.
Okay.
If that's what that says, and you're sure that's what that says, I will believe it.
Did you spend $37,000 for clothes in 1986?
I don't know. And if I spent it, it could have been on credit cards that I didn't pay for. See, does that say these are things really paid for? Or are these things purchased and not paid for? And I'll believe whatever you tell me.
We'll look at the clothes. Check number 3329, date January 6th, payable to J. Magnan,
Mhm.
amount $50.
Okay.
Okay, now are you indicating that that's not a check that you wrote?
No, I'm saying if that's what this says, I will believe every word of it. But I couldn't have agreed earlier until you show me things.
Okay, so looking here at clothing and at all of the checks that you paid, that you
Wait a
wrote,
minute, some of this stuff isn't, well, go ahead. A lot of this stuff isn't clothing now. Any store that he has down there, like Neiman Marcus, is linens, a lot of it was. And Nordstrom's probably clothes, but I. Magnin had other departments, and Saks has other departments. And I told you I had to buy everything for this house. So he wouldn't have known if those were clothes by the name of the store.
okay.
And Bullock's, I hardly ever bought clothes at Bullock's, so it must have been something else.
The last time that you testified, you didn't have any problems with this declaration. When I asked you if you spent $37,000 on clothes, you said sure. Did
Your
you?
Honor, objection.
Sustained.
You asked about a prior inconsistent statement?
You got got something to refresh your recollection, go ahead.
My question to you is, do you dispute these checks? And if these were expenses or checks that you were writing? If so, we will get the original checks. If not, we can introduce this.
If you believe that that's what that is,
Mrs.
I'll believe.
Broderick, that's not appropriate, and
Okay,
you know
is
it.
everything on there say it's a check?
But I
Give it
can't
back to me.
get an
Just a
answer.
minute, let me handle it this way. Mrs. Broderick, she can't testify, you have to testify. So just tell her whether you think those are accurate copies of your checks or not. If you dispute those are your copies, just tell her.
Can I ask her a question?
No, that's not appropriate.
Are all of the figures in there based on
You
checks
can't-
of mine?
You can't ask her a question. If you want to
Okay,
see
let's-
them and see if they're your checks, you're entitled to do that.
If there are check numbers in there, they're my checks, okay?
Okay, you take a look and you tell me if there's something in there that you don't think is attributable to you writing a check on.
I would just have to look at it. Here's a page that says,
So just look at it yourself, Mrs. Broderick. If there's something there you don't agree with, then let her know.
okay, would you come up here, please? This is a page that does not have check numbers on it. It says February, March, April, May, June, places of my charge cards and where I made a purchase, and the amount of the purchase on a charge card. It doesn't say I paid for that.
Are you
See?
disputing that you made that purchase with that charge card?
No, but I'm disputing that I paid this
So-
amount of money.
So what you're indicating is that you.
I had tremendous debts on credit cards,
Did
okay?
you spend $220,000 in 1986?
I cannot verify that without studying this more. I'm sorry. I know Mr. Hargreaves wanted to build up my expenses so that he could get me the support that he thought I should get, that astronomical amount. And I didn't know about these things when he did this. And he was already fired by the time this was done, so. And here are checks payable to credit cards, but not the full amount, payments, not the full amount. So this is not all just checks that I wrote. There are pages and pages here of Home Federal, Great American, Imperial Savings, charges on charge cards that were not in fact paid, okay? But they were in fact charged.
You didn't write checks to make those payments
On the pages like this one,
on the charge card payments.
the charge card payments, I wrote checks to make charge card payments. If I owed $10,000 on a credit card, I only had to make a few $100 payment.
Right, and those are what is listed here under the check number and the payment that you made.
Right, but also on these pages where it's a month, not a check number. See right there, May, June, July, April, those are charges on credit cards. They've not been paid, okay?
So you're indicating that you made some charges on here that you never paid?
A lot. And the figure he came to was of everything that I bought, but not everything I paid for.
I'm gonna leave this with you, and I want you to, when we take a break, take a look at all of the checks. And if there's any dispute with the amount of checks that you wrote, you can let me know.
I'm not disputing the checks that are in here, but it's not just the checks in here. It's the other category, as everyone will see when you submit it.
As of August of 1985, you indicated that Dan Broderick sat down with you and put together a budget and indicated that he was going to pay you $9,000 a month for support.
I thought that was October.
Do
Isn't
you,
that October?
no.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was October.
Well, do you recall writing about it in your book and indicating that it was in August?
I'm just mixed up. If it was August, it was August.
Okay.
It was my memory, it was October.
And he indicated that he was going to make voluntary support payments of $9,000 a month, correct?
Yes.
And in addition to that, he was paying the income tax, the medical insurance, the house taxes, the home insurance, the car payment, the car insurance, and various sundry
Yes.
other things.
Yes.
It is true that he was making those payments without a court order. There was no court order that was requiring him to do that, correct?
There were no court orders of any kind. When we did that budget thing, there was no divorce. There was no.
You had been
separate-
separated since February of 1985,
Yes,
correct? February, March, April, May, June, July, August. So we're talking about being separated for 6 months.
Mhm.
And this is the time when he wanted you to take some responsibility for paying your own bills, right?
that's what he said.
Right, and that was because he was telling you that the marriage was over, that he wasn't coming back, even though you continued to refuse to accept that.
That's not what he ever said, no, because he was still lying about Linda. If you're saying it's August, and if we're going on, it was August, he was still lying about Linda, he was still lying about everything. So no, he didn't say that. He just wanted me to lessen his burden of paying my bills.
Are you saying that he was planning on getting back together with you at that time?
How would I know? I mean, he didn't say anything about that. It wasn't a meeting about that. It was a meeting about that he wanted to give me a certain amount of money so I would start paying my own bills.
And that he explained to you that was because he was filing for divorce?
Absolutely not.
Do you recall him testifying at the divorce trial that he had told you over and over that it was over and that you refused to accept it?
That it was over, that in those words, that it was over?
Maybe not those words, but to the effect that the marriage was over, he was not going to move into Calle de Cielo with
Your Honor,
you.
I'm going to object to that testimony in 89 when he has a motive different than.
Sustained. You have a transcript, want to show it or refresh your recollection, you can do that. Otherwise.
I don't think she had any problems with her recollection. That wasn't the objection.
Well, if you want to show her what he testified to, see if it refreshes her recollection, go ahead.
Do you have any problems with your recollection of him testifying to that?
Your Honor, what he testifies in 89 is not proper to bring forward at this point in time. That refreshes her recollection of what he said in 85.
That's all I'm letting her ask so far, Mr. Irving.
Technically, because there was no court order, he didn't have to pay you anything at that time.
Technically, that's correct.
And then in December of 1986, there was a court order from Napoleon Jones to increase your support to $12,500, correct?
I believe so, yes. It may have been January.
That's, when he was paying $9,000 a month, that was over $100,000 a year. That's $108,000 a year, correct?
I don't think I ever got $9,000 a month. It was his budget with the house payment. By the time he took off the house payment and other bills he said were mine, like those ones with the stickers on that we saw, that he said he was paying that were mine, I never got even half of $9,000.
Well, the bills were to be included in that. If he paid your
True, but I
bills,
never-
that was included in the $9,000 support.
Right, but I didn't get the $9,000. He started at the top of the page with that $9,000 figure, but it never got to me. He made payments out of it.
Right. And you had decided on $9,000 a month, which is
He had
$100,000
decided
a
on
year. And out of that was to come your mortgage and your gas and your electric and everything else,
And
right?
that's what he was hoping that I would settle for, yes.
Do you?
Miss Wells, be a good time to take our afternoon recess?
Sure.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take our afternoon recess at this time. We'll be in recess till 9 tomorrow morning. Please remember the admonition not to discuss the case among yourselves or allow anyone else to discuss it with you, nor form any opinions till it's finally submitted to you. See you tomorrow at 9 o'clock.